Showers this afternoon in Scotland, Northern Ireland, bit of cloud for western areas. Not quite as hot as it was yesterday. Temperatures down by a couple of degrees, but still up to about 32 Celsius in the southeast of England. Through tonight, we'll continue with a bit of cloud, 1 or 2 showers in the northwest. Otherwise, though, it's dry. There were some clear spells. Again, not quite as warm as last night, but still those temperatures getting into the high teens, about 13 to 17 Celsius. Throughout Thursday, a few showers developing in the west. Could be heavy and thundery. For most, it's sunny and very hot. Temperatures 37 degrees in the southeast. Bye-bye.
Hello, this is Business Live from BBC News.
I'm Sally Bundock in Downing Street, braced for Boris. Later today, Mr Johnson will officially become Britain's next Prime Minister.
I'm Ben Thompson, live in London, and that is our top story today, Wednesday, the 24th of July.
Boris Johnson will begin forming his new government later after he succeeds Theresa May as Prime Minister. He'll take office this afternoon after meeting with the Queen at Buckingham Palace.
Beyond who Mr Johnson chooses for the key roles, including Chancellor and Home Secretary. But what does a Johnson government mean for Brexit, trade and the economy? We'll get an expert view from here in London and live from Brussels.
A very warm welcome to the programme, and I have to say it's getting warm here right now in Downing Street, as you can see, and it's really busy here right now as well. A lot of media have gathered because later on today the country's newly elected leader of the Conservative Party, Boris Johnson, will enter the door, number 10 behind me, as the UK's next Prime Minister. Brexit is the biggest issue that he faces, the biggest challenge as new leader. Throughout the contest, of course, for the job, he made a series of key pledges about leaving the European Union. So what can we expect? Well, Mr Johnson has vowed to leave the EU by the 31st of October deadline, come what may, do or die. He claims that the chances of a no-deal Brexit is 1,000,000 to 1. He wants to negotiate a new deal, including replacing the Irish backstop designed to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic. Mr Johnson says the backstop could be replaced with so-called alternative arrangements, including a technological solution to avoid physical customs checks for lorries crossing the border. He says he won't hand over the $48 billion or £39 billion if you prefer, that's the divorce settlement with the EU, until the UK gets a new deal. And if a new deal's not agreed, he will ask the EU for a so-called standstill period to negotiate a free trade deal. Mr Johnson has argued that a provision under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, known as GATT 24, could be used for the UK to avoid tariffs for the next 10 years, but he's admitted it would still need a sign-off from the European Union. Well, let's talk this through with our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, who's with me here in Downing Street. Norman, here we are. Boris Johnson will walk through that door this afternoon as our new Prime Minister. He's got to appoint a team first, I guess. Is that his first job?
Yes, and we're already getting bits and pieces about the sort of team he wants to put together. It's going to be a big change from the sort of current crop, because I think Mr Johnson's view is that Mrs May's team, frankly, ran out of puff, were exhausted, just became politically paralysed from doing anything. he talked yesterday about energising the country. He wants to energise the government. So we're going to see new faces, younger faces, a more diverse cabinet to, as they put it, reflect modern Britain. I think also to counter the idea that Brexit is us sort of somehow turning inward, looking backwards to some sort of post-imperial Dad's Army Britain. He wants to have a sort of confident, outward-looking, energetic cabinet. But crucial to all that is going to be the balance. Now, obviously, there is going to be a big influx of Brexiteers, but it is a delicate balancing act he's got to perform, because the parliamentary party is profoundly divided. And if he just surrounds himself with true believing Brexiteers, and that is going to sort of reinforce the doubts in the parliamentary party, and I imagine will bolster the ranks of those of his critics who are waiting and watching to see if he flounders and then potentially move against it.
What are you hearing about who might move into this house next door, number 11?
Well, the front runner, I guess, is Sajid Javid. He came out for Boris Johnson. He has experience in the Treasury. He would seem a natural fit. The difficulty is, of course, Mr. Johnson's got a whole load of people who might equally think, well, I'm a natural fit too. Liz Truss would say, Chief Secretary, another very loud and vocal backer of Boris Johnson, a woman. Maybe she would be a more natural fit. Matt Hancock too, former Chief of Staff with George Osborne, also with Treasury experience. He too feels he was out there pretty early doors banging the drum for Boris Johnson. So there's a whole group who could get it. If I had to put money on it, I would suggest it would probably go to Sajid Javid.
All right, Norman, we'll leave it there. But thank you very much indeed for your thoughts on that and the inside track even. So that's the Chancellor of the Exchequer, when I say who's moving into number 11, just for those viewers around the world who might not be au fait with all of that. I'm going to hand you now back to Ben.
Sally, thank you. We'll be right back with Sally a little later, but as you can see, Edwin Morgan, Interim Director General of the Institute of Directors, is with me. Edwin, welcome to Business Live. So Sally, looking at some of the procedural stuff about what will happen today, we'll get those appointments. Step back for us a little bit and let's look at where we are now in terms of business and the economy here. What does business want from Mr. Johnson?
So I suppose there are sort of two things we've got to deal with. Obviously, there's Brexit on the one hand. Business still wants a deal. I think that's pretty clear. On the other hand, you have all of the other kind of domestic policy areas. And I think that's where Mr. Johnson has said he wants to be very pro-business. He wants to try and do things to boost business in the short term. So the things that we think, that our members think would help, are things like Brexit planning vouchers for small businesses. There are schemes that run in Ireland and the Netherlands, about £2,000-3,000 just to help small businesses prepare.
And what would they spend that on? What do they need the help with?
Advice, consultancy is the big thing. Actually, when we talk to a lot of our members, they say they don't know how to prepare for Brexit, whatever form it takes, because they don't know what their exposure is, they don't know what the practical implications would be. So actually, most of our members at the moment feel that they've done about as much as they can, the smaller members in particular, but they aren't fully prepared.
So we're talking about someone going into maybe small or medium-sized firms and saying, look, you need to change your labelling, you need to change some of your legal requirements, you need to change some of your paperwork. I mean, is that what it comes down to?
Absolutely. At the most basic level, it is things like that. Because particularly if you're a small business owner, you're focusing on business as usual, running the company day to day, and actually you don't either have the expertise on all of the customs or the tariffs or all those kinds of aspects that you mentioned, or you just don't have the time or the personnel to do all of these things. So actually, at the most basic level for small firms, that kind of stuff could help.
Boris Johnson yesterday talking in his speech about re-energising Britain, and he says, it's the idea he's got to unite it but then energise it. How do you start to do that? Because there's been so much division, so much anger through this referendum process and the Brexit negotiations. I wonder where he even starts to do that.
I mean, things that you could do that would help business in the short term and kind of give them a bit more energy, a bit more zhuzh, I don't know, to copy Mr. Johnson. The things like business rates. So business rate rises have really badly affected lots of companies, smaller companies across the country. You could raise the thresholds, just help out some small and medium-sized firms. Skills are a huge thing, routinely come out as one of our top 3 issues for members. You could inject more money into apprenticeships, for example, which are currently running out of money, the government schemes, or you could expand the apprenticeship scheme actually to sort of broader training levy. There are lots of things you can do in that space. Encouraging investment in new companies would be really great as well. There are schemes, the Enterprise Investment Scheme, the Seed Enterprise Investment Scheme, more money into that, maybe piloting some regional schemes around that to encourage investment into the Northwest, say, those kind of things. I mean, but on a sort of a UK-wide level, really getting behind this agenda of driving growth outside London and the South East. And there are lots of things you can do there around business support. Infrastructure is a massive one, obviously, in the north of England in particular. There are lots of things that the government can do, and sort of speeding them up would really help.
Yeah, big questions over where all the money comes from, though, of course, isn't there? Edwin, it's really good to see you. Thanks so much. Edwin Morgan there, who's the interim Director General of the Institute of Directors. Now, let me bring you up to date with some of the other business headlines from around the world, because the Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba has opened its doors to US sellers on its oldest platform, that's Alibaba.com. It now lets US firms sell on the business-to-business platform in the United States and around the world. Well, the aim is for Alibaba, that's traditionally China-focused, to compete with rivals, including Amazon. The White House has signalled that face-to-face trade negotiations with China are set to restart. Donald Trump's economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, welcomed a report that Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer is scheduled to travel to Shanghai. Mr. Lighthizer's office has yet to comment on those reports. And the US has announced an investigation into leading online platforms, examining whether they are unfairly restricting competition. The Justice Department didn't name any companies, but Facebook, Google, Amazon and Apple are likely to be scrutinised in the wide-ranging investigation. It marks the latest scrutiny of the tech giant's power over the American economy. And the International Monetary Fund has cut its growth forecasts for the global economy for this year and next. It predicts growth of 3.2% in 2019 and 3.5% in 2020. The organisation said growth, quote, remains subdued and there is an urgent need to reduce trade and technology tensions.
Now, reports say that Nissan is planning to expand job cuts to over 10,000 people. This is to help turn around its business. So that would include the 4,800 jobs cuts that it announced earlier this year in May. Let's go live to our Asia Business Hub to get more detail on this. Sharanjit Leyl is there for us today. Lovely to see you, Sharanjit. So what is Nissan likely to be doing? What are the reports saying?
Well, that's right, Sally. You say these 10,000 jobs potentially cut. These are all based off media reports citing unnamed sources. A Nissan spokesperson, meanwhile, has told the BBC the company doesn't comment on such speculation. But we know that these potential cuts come after the car maker announced those 4,800 job cuts that you mentioned in May, which essentially hit projects in the US, Mexico and Europe. And these possible new cuts are expected to hit factories mainly outside Japan as well, according to those same sources. Now, these reports, of course, are increasing fears of job losses at Nissan's UK operations in Sunderland. We know some 7,000 workers there are already facing huge uncertainty due to Brexit and the Japanese carmaker's decision not to build a new X-Trail model in England. And we know Nissan's had a series of challenges this year. It's falling sales in the US and Europe. It's had to deal with the arrest of former boss Carlos Ghosn on financial misconduct charges and tensions with its French partner Renault, which owns a 43% stake in it. Now, the carmaker is due to report its quarterly earnings on Thursday, so we shall all know a bit more about these potential cuts then.
Thank you for staying right across that story for us. More from Sharanjit as we get details on that. But let me show you what markets are doing at this point in the morning. European and US stocks seeing a pretty decent session yesterday. Asia, as you can see, following that lead overnight, the Nikkei ending up just shy of 0.5% higher, partly driven by a downgrade of global growth expectations by the IMF that we've touched on. You might wonder why a downgrade boosts markets. Well, it's because it suggests that central banks may then step in to help prop up growth, and that is good news for equities. Earnings season, of course, well underway too. A good set of figures from banking and tech coming in, on the whole, better than expected. And also, as we've discussed, that speculation speculation that US-China trade talks could restart next week, a welcome relief for nervous investors there. Quick look at what Europe is doing at this point in the morning. The pound slipping against the US dollar again yesterday, but actually performing much better than against other currencies. That helping to perhaps confound expectations of further losses after Boris Johnson was named as the new Conservative Party leader. But of course, all the attention will be on what his cabinet looks like when he starts to assemble that this morning. Well, with us, Leyl Montgomery, who's Associate Director for Personal Investing at Fidelity International. Nice to see you. Welcome to the programme. Look, let's delve straight in there because all the attention will be on that cabinet and what sort of shape that starts to take later. Let's touch on sterling because, yes, they're pretty torrid day as investors worry about what the cabinet will look like and also what the Brexit negotiations will look like.
Yeah, sterling's had a really sort of tricky time of it ever since Brexit was announced and then especially in the last little period. Looking for signals all the time, I think, as to whether we're going to get this sort of no-deal Brexit, which of course is a worry, and that tends to send the pound lower. Over the month, we're down about sort of 2% overall, so it's still looking sort of weak. And really, I think until we get October 31st done and dusted, we're not really going to, the pound's going to have no certainty and not particularly know what to do, looking for clues all the time.
But Leyl, we talk about the weakness of the pound a lot. It is probably the clearest barometer of sentiment about Brexit. But the FTSE 100's done really well this year, partly because of the international flavour of that, but also the UK economy has fared in an OK manner, hasn't it, given the uncertainty we discuss daily?
It certainly has, and I think if people are tempted to sort of, turn their backs on the UK market, they might be missing a trick because not only is the dollar, the strong dollar, weak pound good for sort of exporters and companies that trade overseas a lot, but also, people are not thinking the UK is worth looking at the moment, which means, as contrarian investors will tell you, that there's opportunities to be had there. This could be one of the best times, really, in history, potentially, to actually be investing in the UK.
And Leyl, quickly, let's just turn our attention to that China-US story. Potential trade talks begin again after that deadlock for so long. That could be very good news in terms of unlocking some of that potential that's been caught up in those trade worries.
That could. Again, though, it's another set of worries, isn't it, as to, which way is it going to go. So hopefully there'll be positive news coming out of this. But I think markets are really sort of cautious. Sterling, everything else, and the stock markets generally, sort of looking for any signals they can get as to, where they can find positivity and positive news. So I think it's just another case of, fingers crossed and hoping it turns out good in the end.
I think that's often how things are done, isn't it? Leyl, really good to see you, the Associate Director for Personal Investing at Fidelity International. Thank you.
Thank you.
So much more to come here on Business Live, including talking to those in Brussels about what's happening here in Downing Street today. What is the reaction from European business leaders?
Yeah, we'll be live there a little later in the programme. Stay tuned for that. You're with Business Live from BBC News. And so, as Boris Johnson does prepare to officially become Prime Minister later, he will have just 100 days to prove that he is as good to his word and deliver Brexit by the end of October, with or without a deal. Well, Steph McGovern has been speaking to business owners in Manchester this morning to gauge what they want from the new Prime Minister.
Hello from this rooftop in Manchester city centre. You can see behind me the town hall there in all of its glory. But we're here talking about what businesses think about our new Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. With us we have Matthew Moulding, who's Chief Executive of the Hook Group. You're a business which manufactures, you export all over the world. What are your thoughts on everything going on at the minute? Are you optimistic now we've got Boris Johnson as Prime Minister?
I think, look, having a change, you've got to be optimistic about change, otherwise, you don't make the most of it. Equally, it's quite concerning in terms of Brexit upcoming and what impact that will have. So I think it's a combination of the two.
What could the Prime Minister do to settle your mind at the moment to help your business?
I think give some form of clear guidance around what happens in a no Brexit scenario. Just pushing a no Brexit situation on its own is not helpful to anybody.
Businesses are used to dealing with uncertainty, so for you as a business leader, is this just another thing that you have to deal with, and are you kind of still cracking on, as it were?
Yeah, look, they are uncertain times. We do need to just get on with it. We are recruiting, lots of staff, probably another 1,500 this year, and we're making very large investments. And we're doing that in the face of uncertain times. I don't think there's any other option. I think the alternative is it's a very competitive market, and we'll suffer otherwise.
Yeah, Matthew Walden, thank you very much for your time. That's it from me here in Manchester.
Steph there, gauging reaction from businesses in the northwest.
Hello, you are with Business Live, and our top story today, braced for Boris. Later this afternoon, Mr Johnson will officially become Britain's next Prime Minister and will begin forming his government after he succeeds Theresa May as Prime Minister.
Let's show you what markets make of that in early trade here. The FTSE 100 lower by 0.25%. But keep an eye on the pound, falling yesterday, but then regaining some ground. Remember, a lot of this has been priced in already. No huge surprise that Boris Johnson won that leadership election. But we'll start to get an indication of which way his cabinet will take the negotiations when he appoints some of the senior jobs over the course of today. As Sally's been telling us, he will go to Buckingham Palace to meet with the Queen and then begin the process of assembling his top team.
So what has been the reaction among business leaders across Europe to the news that Boris Johnson is to become the next Prime Minister of the UK and therefore lead the UK out of the European Union? Let's talk this through with Ben Butters, Deputy Chief Executive of Eurochambre. And just to let our viewers know, this organisation represents over 20 million businesses across Europe. So Ben, what are your members saying to you about this?
Well, it was interesting to hear from the business in Manchester a few minutes ago, because our reaction is quite similar, and this is what we're hearing from our members across Europe. We're both relieved and pleased that a new Prime Minister is in place and therefore that the process will move forward, because we're 2/3 of the way into the extended transition period now, and there's been basically no progress so far. But at the same time, as the gentleman from Manchester mentioned, the threat of no deal is one that concerns our businesses greatly.
And are they preparing for that? Do they see that as a very likely scenario now that we have Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, who has said we'll leave do or die 31st of October?
Well, certainly that rhetoric worries the EU 27 business community. They've been preparing for no deal for some months, even before the transition period was extended back in March. But yeah, the messages during the electoral campaign have perhaps exacerbated those concerns. Our hope is, of course, that the Prime Minister will now move on from slogans during his electoral campaign to actually a sensible and pragmatic progress in opening discussions with the EU negotiators again, and that will lead to a negotiated outcome rather than a no-deal scenario, which would be hugely damaging to the UK economy and certainly wouldn't do any favours to the broader European economy either.
From your perspective, who needs to move most? We're getting tough talk from Boris Johnson. We have yet to know who his team is, but they'll be appointed in the next few days. But also Brussels is staying firm and saying that actually there isn't very much wiggle room on the deal that Theresa May brokered. So from your perspective, how will we see progress?
Yeah, it's tough to predict that. As you say, the EU negotiators are very firmly saying that the withdrawal agreement cannot be reopened. There is scope to look at the political declaration on future relations again, and that would seem to be the only place, the only opportunity to come to some kind of compromise. The big issue clearly is about the backstop for the UK, but that has much broader implications for the single market, for the integrity of that single market, which really is a cornerstone of the EU project. So we are really concerned that a sensible solution that deals with the border on the island of Ireland, but also that secures the integrity of the single market. We really hope that can be arranged before the 31st of October.
OK, thank you, Ben Butters there, Deputy CEO of Eurochambre.
Now, there are some other stories in town and away from Downing Street, a busy business day. Today, the US car giant Ford is going to announce its latest earnings. It's showed pretty healthy demand so far for its pickup trucks and SUVs. So what are we expecting? Michelle's got the details.
10 double-decker train cars weighing over £1 million being towed by a truck.
You've got to be kidding me. That is impressive.
But this is no regular pickup. It's Ford's electric F-150. The goal, to convince customers that switching away from a combustion engine isn't a downgrade.
Electrification, we think, is really an important trend. We want to be prepared for it. We want to create that future.
Ford is spending $11.5 billion to electrify its product lineup by 2023. But are customers ready to make the switch? Most drivers still buy conventional gas cars.
I don't have a crystal ball. A lot of things will drive that acceptance. Our strategy is to do it by embracing and playing to our strengths. So going into the segments where we dominate, like pickup trucks, and then electrifying our most iconic nameplates to give us the pricing power as well as the market dominance.
They'll be ready in 60 seconds.
Gimmicks to promote electric vehicles aren't new. Remember this? A Tesla Model X pulling a Boeing 787 Dreamliner plane. Ford's electric truck is hauling 3 times that load. Still, there's no timeline for the electric F-150 to hit showroom floors. A staple of American farms and construction sites, car makers know the truck is beloved in America. Changing drivers' hearts and minds will be key to realising a future that is electric. Michelle Fleury, BBC News, New York.
So a busy day on both sides of the Atlantic. Sally's in Downing Street. Sally, has Theresa May brought you a cup of tea yet?
No tea from Theresa May or Philip Hammond next door. We'll see you very soon.
Good morning. How did you sleep last night? The heat and the humidity brought us some pretty intense storms through the night. They started in the southwest. They tracked their way north and eastwards. Through this morning, or up to this morning, we had about 34,000 lightning strikes across the UK. And that comes after what was a pretty hot day. In Jersey, we recorded the highest July temperature on record, 36 degrees. Now, over the next few days, the heat is going to continue. Slightly fresher today, but the heat builds again for Thursday. So this morning, still quite a lot of rain across northern parts of the UK. Some thunderstorms still. Those will track their way to the north and the east. It will become drier for Scotland, for Northern Ireland, but 1 or 2 showers here. Maybe some cloud across western areas, but for most, it's a sunny afternoon. And maximum temperatures down a little bit by a few degrees or so, but still 32 degrees in the southeast. Through tonight, still a few showers for Scotland, for Northern Ireland. Those are mostly clear away. And then we're looking at clear skies into Thursday morning. Not quite as warm and sticky as last night, but those temperatures still holding up at about 13 to 17 degrees into Thursday. And again, Thursday really is about the heat. It's going to build even further. Low pressure to the west, high pressure to the east. The air is coming all the way in from the south. So very hot air at the moment across France, the Low Countries. That's going to spread its way back in across the United Kingdom, especially in eastern areas. Now, during Thursday, there could be a few showers around western parts, around the Irish Sea coast, a few thunderstorms here, but for most of us, it's a sunny day on Thursday. Those temperatures widely getting up into the 30s, but it's down to the southeast of England where we're expecting temperatures to be about 37 degrees Celsius. Now, that will break the current July record for the UK, beating 36.7 degrees Celsius. And there's a chance we could get close to the all-time record, which is 38.5 Celsius. We'll keep a close eye on that one. But into Friday, this cold front towards the west is going to gradually move its way east, but that's going to slowly introduce some fresher conditions. So if the heat isn't your thing, Friday we'll see those temperatures dropping down to about 21 to 25 degrees, maybe 27 degrees still in the southeast of England. But over the weekend, certainly it's going to feel much cooler. There could be some heavy rain around, especially in northern and eastern areas. That's all from me. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
Wherever you are, follow the story. Get BBC News straight to your inbox. Subscribe at bbc.co.uk/news daily. And if you're on the go, you can still watch the BBC News channel live in the app. Follow the story, wherever you are.
Stories set to shape the news agenda. Headlines, freshly written. Original perspectives on the day's unfolding narratives. See the bigger picture as it emerges. The Papers, weeknights at 10:40 and 11:30 on the BBC News Channel.
This is BBC News. I'm Anita McVeigh, live from Downing Street on the day that Boris Johnson becomes the UK's Prime Minister.
Getting there.
Last night, he celebrated victory in the Conservative leadership contest with party members. Today, he'll enter the doors of Number 10 to lead the country. Mr. Johnson will meet the Queen at Buckingham Palace to get formal permission to form a government. Before that, Theresa May will also be at the palace to offer her resignation to Her Majesty shortly after her final Prime Minister's questions. The attention will then move to the cabinet reshuffle. Supporters say Mr. Johnson will form a team for modern Britain.
I'm Dequesta Burak. Also this morning, after yesterday's heat, heavy rain and thunderstorms hit parts of the UK on what was a warm and uncomfortable night for many. And those warm conditions are set to continue, with temperatures forecast to reach 36 degrees in some places today.
Hello, good morning and welcome to Downing Street, where today the keys to this famous address behind me and the power that comes with office will be handed from Theresa May to Boris Johnson. Mr. Johnson will become our next Prime Minister this afternoon after winning the Conservative leadership contest yesterday. So let's take a look at some of the key moments that we can expect in the day ahead. Theresa May will take part in her last Prime Minister's questions at midday in the House of Commons. She'll then travel back here to Downing Street for a lunch and a staff farewell before making a short speech outside Number 10. Then she'll go to Buckingham Palace to meet the Queen and tender her resignation. A short time after that, we expect Boris Johnson to arrive at Buckingham Palace, where he'll be invited to form a government by the Queen, formally making him Prime Minister. He will then travel here to Downing Street and make a speech outside Number 10 before entering the building as Prime Minister for the first time. And later on, he'll begin announcing his most senior cabinet appointments. And of course, all eyes on who those people will be. So lots of comings and goings here today, lots to talk about. Let's begin with this report from our political correspondent, Nick Eardley.
Boris, move away, please. Whether you love him or you loathe him, in just a few hours' time, Boris Johnson will officially become our Prime Minister.
Has it sunk in yet?
Thank you. Getting there. Last night he was celebrating with supporters, but life in Downing Street is going to be far from easy. This is the moment yesterday he was confirmed as PM in waiting.
Boris Johnson, 92,153.
His message, which enthused supporters:
deliver Brexit, unite the country and defeat Jeremy Corbyn. And that is what we're going to do.
This afternoon, all eyes will be on Downing Street when Mr Johnson returns from Buckingham Palace to tell the country what he wants to do with power. Brexit will be his biggest challenge in here, but expect him to talk more about domestic plans. New Prime Ministers love to have a vision for the country. PM Johnson is no different. Later, he'll start putting his top team together, the people who will sit around this table. Team Johnson is promising a cabinet for modern Britain, but that'll be the easy bit. Boris Johnson might make some in his party feel good, but others are deeply worried about his Brexit plan. And he faces a tougher time here in Parliament than almost all new Prime Ministers. A wafer-thin majority, several of his Tory colleagues in open revolt. Strap in, it's going to get bumpy. Nick Early, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's mull over the day ahead with our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, with me here in Downing Street. Morning to you, Norman. As Boris Johnson said yesterday, the campaign is over, the work begins. The first order of business for him then, his cabinet. What do you think we can expect?
I think it's going to be a big shake-up because part of the sort of driving thought in Team Boris is that they want to inject a bit of life, a bit of energy, a bit of can-do. Their view is that the current government has basically run out of puff. There are far too many people who've been around the block far too many times, are jaded, are worn out, that the cabinet is sort of politically paralysed from doing anything, not just Brexit, but anything. Nothing is happening. So he wants to get younger, newer, hungrier ministers in place who are actually going to do things and have a sort of upbeat, optimistic mood to reflect his own sort of approach to politics. The second thing is we're told it's going to be a much more diverse cabinet. So many more women, many more members of ethnic minorities to reflect modern Britain. I think, too, to counter the notion that Brexit is somehow a sort of old fuddy-duddy looking over your shoulder to better times in the past, to try and say, actually, Brexit is about a much more outward-looking Britain. But it's also going to have to be about trying to hold his party together, which is, a profoundly divided party. So it's a balancing act too. And interesting, already I think is running into quite a bit of difficulty over what on earth to do with Jeremy Hunt. Because Mr Hunt has pretty clearly said, look, I ain't going anywhere. Or if I'm going anywhere, then it's only to be Home Secretary, maybe Deputy Prime Minister. Team Boris clearly take the view, no. We are reserving those posts for our people, prominent Brexiteers. So last night they just offered him Defence Secretary. Mr Hunt apparently said no. I suspect he may well, as a result, be out of the cabinet. Question, how does that play out? Do people think that threatens already the fragile unity? The one big promotion we really know about at the moment is Priti Patel. Now, we know she's going to get one of the top jobs. A lot of speculation about whether she would get the position of Home Secretary. That would be a bold move, shall we say, because Priti Patel is very much on the right of the party. She used to back capital punishment. She has a hard line on immigration. So that would be a really sort of tough appointment as Home Secretary. Albeit this morning, Ms Patel was playing her cards pretty close to her chest when she was asked what job she hoped for.
Well, look, I'm not speculating about jobs or roles in government at all because the decision behind that lies firmly with the Prime Minister.
How important is it that women are at the top table?
Well, look, I think it's important, and in fact Boris Johnson said this during his leadership contest, that he wants to see a modern Conservative party. And I recall from his days when he was running London as Mayor for London, he had a very diverse and dynamic team, and of course I think that was good for London, and I think he'll do the same in government now.
So it is rumoured that this will be the most diverse cabinet. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it's important that we have a government that reflects modern Britain, but at the same time the modern Conservative Party. So, a party of all talents, but importantly, a party now that's going to unite and come together and get behind our new leader.
Priti Patel there. And for any politician who's making the transition from candidate to leader-elect and later today to Prime Minister, they make that transition from the things they say in the campaign to reality biting. And that's definitely the case for Boris Johnson. What are the challenges going to be for him, Norman? There are many.
Huge. I mean, the obvious one is Brexit. And there the key question is, what kind of Brexiteer is Boris Johnson? And I would suggest we don't actually know. He famously, decided which side to back in the referendum campaign by writing a newspaper article in favour of staying in and a newspaper article in favour of coming out. And I think that you know, suggests his kind of chameleon quality, if you like, when it comes to politics. He can move in all sorts of different directions. He can be Boris Johnson, the Liberal Mayor of London, or he can be sort of the tub-thumping party traditionalist. He can play it all sorts of ways. When you are Prime Minister, though, you have to give a lead. So he's going to have to go on the front foot and actually tell us what he genuinely believes in. And on Brexit, I think that's a conundrum. We don't really know whether he has signed up to the true believers' Brexit, whether he is actually prepared, do or die, to come out. Or, actually, cometh the hour, once he gets into the negotiations with the EU, he proves much more malleable, much more of a compromiser, and perhaps beats back to the sort of deal struck by Mrs May. And I think that's reflected across the board with Boris Johnson. If you take his attitude towards business, famous moment when he said, you know, F business. And then if you look at his track record when it comes to business, certainly when he was Mayor of London, businessmen, you know, they have only good things to say about Boris Johnson. In that sense, he's promising, you know, big infrastructure projects. Again, it's that uncertain picture. So
Lots of contradictions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a word then on Theresa May, Norman. She will, as we explained a few moments ago, make a short statement, then on Theresa May, Norman. She will, as we explained a few moments ago, make a short statement, a short speech here at Downing Street later on. What do you think she might be saying? Do you think she's going to reflect on, well, she's had a long goodbye, hasn't she? But
really
is she
has.
going to reflect on the struggles that she's gone through trying to get her deal through Parliament?
I suspect there might be some of that. I think it'll be tempered by the fact that we have already had, if you like, the Downing Street tears. We had the speech the other day reflecting on the increasing callousness of politics and the need for compromise. So we've had the emotion, we've had the big thought. I suspect it might be more a sort of voice of encouragement for Boris Johnson. I think it will be an entirely positive sort of farewell and lift-off for him. I don't think there'll be any carping. I think she'll probably shy away from the tone of regrets. We've had that to some extent. Albeit, you know, the emotion of the occasion could yet overcome her.
It may get to her.
Yeah.
Norman, thank you very much for the moment. I'll talk to you again very soon. But now more on Boris Johnson, because he is, of course, one of the most recognisable but also polarising politicians in the UK. His victory yesterday was met with a mixture of delight and despair. Here's how the main opposition parties reacted.
He's been elected on a programme which appears to be tax write-offs for the very richest and a no-deal exit from the European Union. I think he needs to think a bit more carefully about where we're going.
Boris Johnson should not underestimate the strength with which my government, my party will fight against Brexit generally, but a no-deal Brexit in particular.
I'm looking forward to a more dynamic relationship in the sense that it will be more of an ongoing relationship, conversations, involvement. I think that's important, not just with us, but with all wings of the Conservative Party as well. And I think that Boris's style is to do that kind of thing.
Boris Johnson is not fit to be Prime Minister. He's shown that time and time again, whether it's the diplomatic gaffes that he has frankly revelled in, causing offence gratuitously to people, and the fact that he just doesn't care about anyone but himself.
Joe Swinson. Well, yesterday's election of Boris Johnson as leader of the Conservative Party and therefore soon to be our next Prime Minister wasn't a shock result and was decided in the end by around 140,000 Conservative Party members. But what do people more generally make of the Prime Minister Johnson to be? Our reporter Nina Warhurst went to Bolton, which recently became a Tory-run council for the first time in 4 decades.
He was on the cards, though, that was a storming kind of result for Boris. Really bad. Yeah.
Conservatives through and through. Adele, Maureen and Brian say Boris is the man who can bring Bolton together.
When I saw you after the local elections, you said that Theresa May had been a tough sell on the doorstep in Bolton. Will it be different with Boris, an easier sell?
The reason that Theresa May was quite a hard sell in May was because of Brexit.
You gave a little whoop there.
Well, I think he's right for the job. He's jolly, he's happy, and he just says it as it is.
What does he need to do, day one?
He needs to get us out of the European Union.
Even if we can't get a deal with the EU?
I don't think we'll get a deal.
58% of people voted leave here, and like in many parts of the country, that has launched traditional loyalties up in the air.
Bolton is one of those places where people can be persuaded to change their minds. In fact, the swing vote is so significant here that 2 years ago, Theresa May chose Bolton to launch her general election campaign. And so, if there is another one of those, it won't be local Conservatives Boris Johnson will have to win over, it'll be everyone else.
I don't support any Conservative Prime Minister because as a disabled person, I don't think they represent me.
Politics, I don't know where it's going, which way it's going, I really can't say at the moment.
So you'll leave it to the election day to decide?
I will do, yeah. I will leave it till late, yeah.
Will you have your vote at the next general election?
I think he will, yeah. Why? Because he looks like an interesting fellow. I like his style.
David is also a new Conservative leader, but at Bolton Council, and he is willing to work with the new Prime Minister if it comes to accepting no deal.
There has to be some degree of optimism here at the opportunities that are out there, and I do believe this country will rally. I believe businesses will rally.
But with austerity costing councils 60 pence out of every pound of government spend, blue-on-blue tension is inevitable.
There's no question, I don't hide it, you know, local government has been disproportionately hit. They were asked this in the hustings. Both of them gave the reply that they would look more favourably on local government. They have to deliver on that now.
But will he? Can he? In the coming weeks, we'll see if Boris Johnson brings home a Brexit deal from Brussels and brings in the swing voters in places like Bolton. Nina Warhurst, BBC News.
And joining us now is Dr. Catherine Haddon, who's Senior Fellow at the Institute for Government. Catherine, great to have you with us today. Talk to us first of all, if you would, about the logistics of this handover of power today and how that will unfold.
Well, the ceremonial aspect of it is a well-worn procedure. Both Buckingham Palace and the civil service are very used to doing this. After Prime Minister's questions, Theresa May will come back to number 10. We hear she's going to say some parting words, and then she'll be off to the palace to formally tender her resignation. And then after that, she leaves and she doesn't return back to number 10. You know, in theory, all her packing is done. She's ready to go. In the meantime, sort of within 20 minutes or so, Boris Johnson will come into the palace and will be formally appointed as Prime Minister. He then returns to number 10. He may say some words before entering into that famous door, and then he's straight down to it. He's straight into meetings. He's straight into getting briefings from the civil service on the important issues of the day.
And during his campaign, Boris Johnson talked about, well, a political reality that perhaps a lot of people didn't recognise, one in which he would make the decisive difference in getting a deal through potentially, or if not, taking the UK out of the EU, but overcoming the barriers that Theresa May found during her time in power. So when Charles Walker, the co-chair of the 1922 committee, said, can backbenchers be kinder to the new Prime Minister than they have been to Theresa May? I mean, do you think he's going to have any kind of honeymoon period? Certainly not with the opposition parties, that one would imagine.
No, I mean, it's extraordinary to think that he, you know, might do in 3 months what Theresa May has done in 3 years, and he faces a massive uphill battle on that front because positions have hardened. The ministerial resignations, even before he was announced as leader, show just how much even, you know, MPs in his own party have hardened against the stance that he looks like he's going to take. So from that point of view, it really is going to be quite difficult for him to try and bring some kind of consensus. That said, we've seen extraordinary happenings in British politics for the last few years, so maybe he can pull some rabbit out of the hat, but he's got a very, very short time to do so. And we still don't know what exactly it is he plans to do that's different from what Theresa May has been trying.
How important will the cabinet appointments be and the overall makeup and balance of the cabinet be in terms of trying to help him pull that rabbit out of the hat that you just mentioned?
I think they're really important, and for two reasons. I mean, number one, as you say, it's whether or not he tries to bring balance. He said that he wants everyone signed up for leaving on the 31st of October, come what may, which implies that he's not going to be looking for more of the moderates, which is why they think they're likely to be out of office. But that said, even trying to get the sort of cast of character, and he's got a lot of people gunning for not very many jobs. He's also got to think about what's effective as a minister. If he wants to get this job done quickly, he needs to have people in place who are capable of going out there and, you know, helping him if it is to get a deal, to try and get that deal, or to prepare for no deal, and also on all the other domestic policy things that he's been talking about. So he really needs good, effective ministers in place, as well as this problem of pleasing all the people who are currently supporting him.
OK, Dr. Catherine Haddon from the Institute for Government, thank you very much for your time this morning. And of course, those ministers will need to be capable of developing good relationships with EU negotiators. And the EU's chief Brexit negotiator, Michel Barnier, is going to be meeting the European Parliament's steering group on Brexit this morning to discuss Boris Johnson's approach to Brexit. Let's talk now to our Brussels correspondent, Adam Fleming. Morning to you as well, Adam. What reaction has there been, first of all? I think useful for you to summarise for us what reaction there's been from Europe to Boris Johnson's victory.
Yeah, lots of EU leaders have been tweeting, and they've all been tweeting roughly similar things, saying that they congratulate Boris Johnson on winning the leadership of the Conservative Party and being poised to take over as Prime Minister later today. And they use the word constructive a lot. They hope that they have a constructive relationship. They've basically got to say that. That's what happens at these diplomatic moments. That's the sort of niceties that you get at these points. The EU's position when it comes to the Brexit deal was summed up by Michel Barnier, the chief negotiator, in a tweet yesterday lunchtime, where he also said that he hoped there would be a constructive relationship. He said that the EU would do what it could to facilitate the ratification of the withdrawal agreement. So the withdrawal agreement, remember, is the divorce bit of the Brexit deal. And the EU, that is them saying they're not prepared to change it, but they are willing to do stuff around it that could help it get through Parliament. More of the stuff that they've been doing all year, which they did to help Theresa May try and get the deal through Parliament. But then Michel Barnier goes on to say that he stands ready to rework the other bit of the Brexit deal, which is the political declaration, which sketches out the shape of the future relationship and will be the blueprint or the roadmap for the next phase of Brexit negotiations. That is where officials think all the room for manoeuvre is. When you ask them about what they can do about the withdrawal agreement, they think that the cupboard is kind of bare when it comes to other ideas for changing it. And they certainly are not countenancing the ideas put forward by people in the leadership contest, like getting rid of the backstop for Northern Ireland, or putting a time limit, or junking the entire withdrawal agreement and just keeping the transition period bit. So that's going to be some tricky discussions ahead.
OK, so limited room for manoeuvre, perhaps. Adam, thank you very much for that. Adam Fleming in Brussels. We'll be back just before 9:30 for the latest from here, and then the Victoria Derbyshire programme will be live from Westminster a little earlier than usual. And at 1:45 here on the BBC News Channel and BBC One, join us for a BBC News special with Hugh Edwards in Downing Street and Sophie Rayworth at Buckingham Palace for live coverage as Theresa May steps down as Prime Minister and Boris Johnson takes over. But first, back to the studio now to Luqueza for today's roundup of other news.
Anita, thank you very much. Very good morning to you. Police divers are searching for 3 people missing in different parts of the River Thames. They're looking for a 22-year-old man who failed to resurface after going swimming with friends at Shadwell Basin in Wapping just after 6 o'clock last night. Officers are also searching a stretch of the river near Waterloo Bridge after reports of a person in difficulty, whilst a third person was reported to be in the water at Kingston upon Thames. Immediate improvements are being ordered at a young offenders institution in West London. The move comes after a report found that there'd been a collapse in standards of care and safety at Feltham. The site holds more than 100 boys aged between 15 and 18. The operator of a British-flagged oil tanker has made contact with the 23 crew members for the first time since the ship was captured by Iran in the Strait of Hormuz last week. A spokesman for the Swedish-based tanking operator, Stena Bulk, said that the crew was safe with good cooperation with the Iranian personnel on board. The detainment of the Stena Impero comes amid tensions between the UK and Iran, just weeks after Britain helped seize a tanker carrying Iranian oil off Gibraltar. Now, with exactly 1 year until the start of the 2020 Olympics in Tokyo, the International Olympic Committee says the city is fully on track to deliver the Games. Budget figures released last year put the total cost at more than $12.5 billion, well above their original estimate of $6 billion. 3.2 million tickets have already been bought in the first phase of sales. Now, the Met Office has recorded temperatures in excess of 30 degrees Celsius in England, and it's expected to be even warmer today. Parts of Europe have already seen record-breaking temperatures, and previous highs could be surpassed in the UK before the end of the week. Lee Milner has the report.
Lots of families waking up this morning will no doubt be heading to a beach like this one. Here in Bournemouth yesterday, temperatures reached 30 degrees. The sea was almost as crowded as the sand. With the jet stream drawing heat up from Africa, you'd expect this fella at Longleat Safari Park in Wiltshire to be used to it. But that ice lolly won't last long on Thursday, with temperatures set to soar above 38 degrees, making it the hottest day on record for the UK.
And it won't just be the hottest day on Thursday either. We're also expecting the hottest night as well. Forecasters record that by measuring the lowest temperature before things start heating up again in the morning. And on Thursday, it could reach above 23 degrees.
Meanwhile, overseas, France and Germany are also expecting scorching heat. In the Netherlands and Belgium, it's expected to top 40 degrees for the first time. Fortunately, in Portugal, firefighters say the wildfires have finally been brought under control. But right across Europe, the advice being given by health experts is to stay in the shade and keep hydrated. Lee Milner, BBC News.
Well, let's have a look at the all-important weather. Here's Simon King.
Good morning. How did you sleep last night? The heat and the humidity brought us some pretty intense storms through the night. They started in the southwest. They tracked their way north and eastwards. Through this morning, or up to this morning, we had about 34,000 lightning strikes across the UK. And that comes after what was a pretty hot day. In Jersey, we recorded the highest July temperature on record, 36 degrees. Now, over the next few days, the heat is going to continue. Slightly fresher today, but the heat builds again for Thursday. So this morning, still quite a lot of rain across northern parts of the UK, some thunderstorms still. Those will track their way to the north and the east. It will become drier for Scotland, for Northern Ireland, but 1 or 2 showers here. Maybe some cloud across western areas, but for most it's a sunny afternoon. And maximum temperatures down a little bit by a few degrees or so, but still 32 degrees in the southeast. Through tonight, still a few showers for Scotland, for Northern Ireland. Those are mostly clear away. And then we're looking at clear skies into Thursday morning. Not quite as warm and sticky as last night, but those temperatures still holding up at about 13 to 17 degrees into Thursday. And again, Thursday really is about the heat. It's going to build even further. Low pressure to the west, high pressure to the east. The air is coming all the way in from the south. So very hot air at the moment across France, the Low Countries. That's going to spread its way back in across the United Kingdom, especially in eastern areas. Now, during Thursday, there could be a few showers around western parts, around the Irish Sea coast, a few thunderstorms here, but for most of us, it's a sunny day on Thursday. Those temperatures widely getting up into the 30s, but it's down to the southeast of England where we're expecting temperatures to be about 37 degrees Celsius. Now, that will break the current July record for the UK, beating 36.7 degrees Celsius. And there's a chance we could get close to the all-time record, which is 38.5 Celsius. We'll keep a close eye on that one. But into Friday, this cold front towards the west is going to gradually move its way eastward. That's going to slowly introduce some fresher conditions. So if the heat isn't your thing, Friday we'll see those temperatures dropping down to about 21 to 25 degrees, maybe 27 degrees still in the southeast of England. But over the weekend, certainly it's going to feel much cooler. There could be some heavy rain around, especially in northern and eastern areas. That's all from me. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
OK, let's return to Downing Street and Anita McVeigh. Anita.
Theresa, thank you very much. Yes, later on today, of course, Boris Johnson will be walking through that famous door behind me. He will be the 14th Prime Minister of the Queen's reign so far, with lots of predictions about, given the difficult political circumstances in which he finds himself, how long he can stay as Prime Minister. Well, let's just discuss a little bit more about the day ahead with our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. And, Theresa May, she had quite a big run at trying to get Brexit sorted, trying to get her deal through. I mean, Boris Johnson has got less than 100 days before the October 31st deadline. So that time pressure, as much as anything else, is a huge challenge for him, isn't it?
It's a massive challenge trying to push Brexit through in that sort of time period. It's like, I don't know, the political equivalent of trying to paint the Mona Lisa in an afternoon. It is just such an enormous challenge. Bear in mind that half the EU go on holiday, they've disbanded their team of negotiators, so they're not even around to do the nuts and bolts of a deal. The only thing which I think provides Boris Johnson with a glimmer of hope is Boris Johnson. That is the only thing which has changed in this whole dynamic. The EU's still got the same negotiating position, the parliamentary arithmetic hasn't changed, the arguments haven't changed. The only thing different is Boris Johnson. And he seems to think, almost by force of personality, he can just sort of bend Brexit through. And that has to be his hope, because otherwise it's very hard to see how you manage to tweak and construct a different deal in that sort of time frame.
And very briefly, Norman, if there is some sort of rework deal, of course, the EU has got to be convinced that actually it's worth pushing this through, that Boris Johnson can get it through Parliament here.
Yeah, absolutely. And the time frame to get a bill and legislation through Parliament, even if there was the will, looks, well, getting towards politically impossible.
OK, the clock is very much ticking. Much more from you, Norman, coming up. We're live in Westminster throughout the day with the latest developments as Boris Johnson becomes our new Prime Minister. Now let's cross to College Green for the Victoria Derbyshire programme. And this morning, that's with Joanna Gosling.
Hello, it's Wednesday, it's 9:30. I'm Joanna Gosling. Boris Johnson is off to Buckingham Palace this afternoon to be confirmed as the country's new Prime Minister.
I say to all the doubters, dude, we are going to energise the country. We're going to get Brexit done on October the 31st. We're going to take advantage of all the opportunities that it will bring in a new spirit of can-do.
He said he will name a cabinet for modern Britain with more women and a record number of ministers from ethnic minorities, with MPs like Priti Patel and Rishi Sunak tipped for promotion. But more resignations from the government are expected too.
I'm not speculating about jobs or roles in government at all, because the decision behind that lies firmly with the Prime Minister.
The self-proclaimed Dude of Downing Street has already pledged to dispel defeatism. Today, he sets out his vision for Britain after Brexit.
For the next hour and a half, we'll be speaking to allies of the new Prime Minister and critics too, plus MPs from all sides. We'll ask, can Boris Johnson really deliver Brexit on the 31st of October as promised? What will his other policy priorities be? And have a look at this.
Most politicians, as far as I can work out, are pretty incompetent and then have a veneer of competence.
Yes.
You do seem to do it the other way around.
Yes. Oh, you can't rule out the possibility that, beneath the elaborately constructed veneer of a, blithering idiot, there lurks a blithering idiot.
Will Boris Johnson's unique style be a help or a hindrance as Prime Minister? We will ask people who know him well what they think. Hello, welcome to the programme. We're live until 11 this morning. It's Boris Johnson's first day in office. Let's take a look at what the papers are saying about the new Prime Minister. I'm the dude is the headline on the front of the Telegraph. That stands for Deliver Brexit, Unite the Country, Defeat Corbyn, Energise Britain. And that's a picture, actually, that features on the front of many of the papers. Same picture on the front of the Times. The headline there, Johnson goes to work. Now bring us sunshine, the Daily Mail says. EU talks looming, rebel MPs plotting, but after Boris wins landslide vote with a burst of optimism on the day Britain baked a Brexit-weary nation's cry is now bring us sunshine. The Guardian, an ambition is fulfilled, but what next for Britain? Power at last is how the Eye sees it, tasked with delivering now, it says, on his Brexit rhetoric. And the Daily Mirror's gone for a different take. It's got various memorable pictures from his time previously when he was Mayor of London, and the headline on the front page there is really not funny anymore. And finally, The Sun, hey dude, don't make it bad. Boris, I'll deliver Brexit and beat Jez. So that's a quick look at the front pages. Do get in touch with your thoughts on the new Prime Minister. Lots of you getting in touch already. Keith on Twitter, he's got the job done. His sole aim to be PM, and that's it. The Brexit shambles will just continue and worsen. Beatrice on Facebook says, call a general election so people have a say. Bradley on Facebook, could become one of the greatest peacetime Prime Ministers in history. Admittedly, it could also go disastrously wrong. Time will tell. Andres on Facebook, if the job is continuing to completely screw up the country like the last two Prime Ministers, then certainly he'll do just fine. Lee on Facebook, a clown in charge of a massive circus. Not surprised, the whole lot need ripping out and starting again. British politics is dead. They're all out of touch. None have listened or done as they have been asked by the public 52% who voted to leave. All we have had so far is lies and deception. Thanks for those. Keep them coming. Hashtag Victoria Live. And don't forget, if you're emailing and you're happy for us to contact you, please put your details in your email. Let's go straight to Norman Smith, who can give us the overview. Norman, what is going to be happening today?
Well, today I think we begin to get a picture of the kind of Prime Minister Boris Johnson is going to be, because we will get the sort of bare bones, I think, by close of play of his cabinet. And that'll tell us the sort of people he's surrounded himself with, what his approach to government is going to be. Now, his team have already given us a sort of little taster. They say bluntly they want to inject some mojo into cabinet. Their view is that the current crop have basically run out of steam. They become tired, they become exhausted, politically paralysed. They want to bring in some fresh blood to shake things up, give a sense of can-do, to energise, as Mr. Johnson says. At the same time, they want a cabinet that reflects modern Britain. So many more women, more members of ethnic minorities, and more younger Tories from the sort of 2015 generation that were elected. And I think that is part of trying to rebuff the idea that Brexit is all a bit fuddy-duddy, looking over your shoulder to a Britain gone past. They want to project an image of Britain as outward-looking, confident on the dawn of a new Brexit. And the last thing he's got to do is to bind his fractured parliamentary party together. And there we are in the land of the old tightrope walk, because there are going to be a lot of Brexiteers who are brought into the cabinet, but he can't afford for it just to be a sort of true believers cabinet. So he's got to keep aboard some former Remainers, and there it's beginning already to look a little bit wobbly, in particular over the position of one Jeremy Hunt, his rival in the leadership contest, who I suspect may be on the way out, because he will only stay really if he's given one of the top jobs. Last night Mr. Johnson said, well, you can have the job of Defence Secretary. Mr. Hunt said, no, that's not good enough. So I think he may well be leaving, and that could already test the fragile unity in the Johnson government.
Thank you very much, Norman. Well, Boris Johnson once said he had more chance of being reincarnated as an olive than becoming Prime Minister. Well, today he will fulfil his lifetime ambition and take on the top job in British politics. The man who was a key figure in the Leave campaign, some argue they couldn't have won without him, will now take charge of the Brexit process, promising we will leave the EU with or without a deal by the 31st of October. That is just one of the huge tasks facing him as he replaces Theresa May in number 10 Downing Street. His Conservative government still has to rely on the votes of the Northern Irish Democratic Unionist Party to get anything done. He inherits a party that just came fifth in the recent European elections. And in Parliament there remains widespread opposition to leaving the EU if no deal can be reached. We're going to ask some of the key figures who know and have worked with him and who like and dislike him, whether the former Mayor of London and the Foreign Secretary, his ability will match up to his ambition. Well, we can talk now to one of Boris Johnson's backers, Nadeem Zahawi. He's Children's Minister and switched to supporting Boris Johnson when his first choice, Dominic Raab, was eliminated from the race. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Nicholas Soames was on Newsnight last night, and he said this is not the time when we need someone who is a bit of a chancer. I can't recall someone else coming in to be the leader of this country where there have been so many questions around their ability to deliver on what they say and their character.
So I've known Boris for 20 years. When I was founding YouGov and running YouGov, Boris decided to stand as Mayor of London. The Conservative Party then was 17 points behind in London. Everyone said it's impossible for a Conservative candidate to win in London, yet he came from behind and he won. And not only did he win once, but Londoners then voted him back in because of what he delivered. He delivered more affordable housing in a downturn than the previous Labour government.
I mean, these things, sorry to interrupt, but these things have been said again and again about Boris Johnson. But what he wasn't facing there was 27 other countries completely united saying, we're not going to give you what you want. 3 months to do it in when it's something that's been apparently impossible to resolve for 3 years. And a parliamentary majority of 2, it's testing for anyone.
It is testing for anybody, but I think if there's one human being who can actually unite the party, bring the country back together again, inject a massive dose of optimism, which I think is important in politics. Look, these things matter. Communications matter. To build coalitions matter. If Theresa May, had one fault, it was the inability to build that coalition for her vote. And I think ultimately communications, and he's the master of communications, do matter. Bringing people together. He demonstrated. He brought Andrea Leadsom, arch Brexiteer, with Robert Buckland, who was a Remainer and campaigned vigorously for Remain, into his camp very early on, and actually brought the 160 MPs, the majority of MPs, back.
When we look at what's happened so far, we've got someone who said, in order to serve under me in a cabinet, you have to sign up to no deal Brexit, and so you've got all these key figures leaving. Philip Hammond expected to go today. David Gawker's gone. Rory Stewart, he apparently had a conversation with Rory Stewart to say he wanted to bring him in. He wants to bring people together. And Rory Stewart's like, I think you forget what I was standing for. There is going to be a very powerful group of ex-ministers who are gathering on the backbenches who are determined to stop a no-deal Brexit. And they're potentially going to be joined by an alliance of other MPs from other parties in some sort of coalition. That is the political reality.
It is, and you mentioned Nicholas Soames earlier. Nicholas Soames tweeted out yesterday, what a great appointment for Mark Spencer, the Chief Whip, who is a farmer, a Remainer, and highly respected. So it demonstrates that Boris will bring a coalition of MPs together to be ministers. You'll see his cabinet, you'll see people who were in the Remain camp, and of course Brexiteers, but all signed up to getting a good deal out of the EU. Now, your question, let me just get to the point, because you asked me the question. Your question was, can he deliver a deal? Well, if your interlocutors on the other side believe that you are determined and that you have a disciplined cabinet and ministerial team behind you, that you want to do a fair deal for Britain, but the backstop has to be dealt with. There are issues around much of the deal that that needs to be put into the future agreement. Then I think, if they know that your cabinet is disciplined and behind you, that you're prepared to walk away, not that you want to, that you're prepared to walk away if you have to, then I think that they will think again and actually produce a fairer deal for Britain.
The thing, obviously, that you're saying, the phrase that you're using is you think that will happen. What if it doesn't?
It's a negotiation, ultimately, and
no,
what
but I mean,
Boris
there's 3 months, and what if? Let's just scroll forward, because obviously, the hope is, as Boris Johnson is saying, that he can somehow get a new deal. Those who say that's just not going to happen say, well, if the EU bends on this one, it sends out a message to anybody involved in future negotiations with those 27 countries that they'll bend if the other side pushes hard enough. So obviously that's something to bear in mind. But if they don't, where do we end up? Because there is a coalition in Parliament that wouldn't agree to the deal.
So actually, your question in itself defines the problem we've had in the last 3 years, which is we negotiate with ourselves. Oh, if they don't accept this, then what will we do? You go into negotiation fully prepared to walk away. You prepare the country, which is what Boris will absolutely do. We were prepared on the 29th of March. I was in the Department of Education, and we were a donor department to DEFRA and to HMRC. We were pretty much there on the 29th of March. Boris will turbocharge that now to be ready. Why? Because if the other side believe, and they never did, there was that documentary that Nick Robinson did the other day,
I do understand what you're saying, but what I'm asking you, though,
you can't negotiate with yourself. You have to go in
But ultimately, what happens on the 31st if that proves to have been wrong? Can this country leave with no deal on the 31st of October? Can Boris Johnson guarantee that? And it looks like he can't, because there are people within the Tory party who say that they would be prepared to vote against the government in a vote of no confidence to trigger a general election.
Well, first of all, let's get to that point, get through the negotiation. It's a much better place to be. And I spent most of my life in business rather than in politics. In a negotiation, you've got to be prepared, not that you want to walk away if you have to. And I think the best way to go into a negotiation is to be ready. If the other side believe that you are ready, then they will think in a different way to the way they've been thinking up till now, when they've been essentially told, we will never leave without a deal. Whereas what Boris is saying is, I want a deal. I will strain every sinew to do a deal with you that is fair to us and fair to you, not locking us in to this backstop and perpetually being in the European Union. But if you don't give me a deal, I am prepared to walk away. That is the difference here. And I think ultimately the 31st of October is the legal date. Parliament behind us has voted, that's the vote that colleagues have voted for, whether you vote to remain or leave, that we will leave the European Union on the 31st of October.
Nigel Farage has a solution for ensuring a no-deal Brexit, and that's do a deal with the Brexit Party, have a general election and get a majority for a no-deal Brexit. And when in the European elections, that was the party that was the big winner, 32% of the vote versus 7% of the 9% for the Tories. That sounds like a viable option if what Boris Johnson really is determined to do is to deliver no deal by the 31st.
Reason that the pop-up party, Brexit Party, has actually emerged and done well in the European elections is the electorate was sending us a message, not just to the Conservative Party, but to the Labour Party, to say we're not happy that you have not delivered on your promise to effectively enact our instruction to you to deliver Brexit. If we deliver Brexit, and many Labour MPs who don't believe in the sort of London Labour Party's position of remain and essentially break the promise to the nation, will, I think, ultimately, you heard Sarah Champion the other day on one of your programmes on the BBC saying that she, if she had to, would vote for a WTO Brexit rather than staying in the European Union or having another referendum, which will essentially, if you think of the second referendum, people, it's compounding the uncertainty on British business, and we could still be back in square one. So I think Boris's arguments are pretty compelling, and I believe that his brand of optimism and bringing people in, you said he spoke to Rory, Boris will speak to anyone if he thinks they will help him deliver on his promise to leave on the 31st of October.
Is it the definition of an anticlimax when you get a new government saying that something is going to happen, there's 100 days to do it, and the very day after Boris Johnson becomes Prime Minister, MPs go off on holiday for 6 weeks?
Well, I can guarantee you Boris Johnson's government is not going on holiday for 6 weeks, whether I'm in it or outside it. I don't know. It's up to the Prime Minister. I have had no conversation with my friend Boris, but he will have to decide who is his team. But I will guarantee you right now that they will start work immediately. He said it yesterday. The work begins now. His whole team will be starting work through the whole summer to make sure we're ready to leave on the 31st of October, which I am optimistic will be with a deal.
What's the material thing the government would need to do to prepare for a no-deal Brexit? Because by all admissions, we are not ready. It needs to be, I mean, is it a tax cut? What is it? Something to stimulate the economy?
We're already preparing. So I am, up until today, I'm on the ministerial team for preparations for Brexit. That team has been working solidly to make sure that every department is ready for Brexit. Education department will be ready for Brexit. Every other department will be ready for Brexit. That's what needs to happen. The nation has to know, businesses, large and small, have to know that the government is behind them and ready to leave on the 31st of October with a deal, but if we don't get a deal, we'll still leave on the 31st of October.
Nadeem Zahawi, thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, Boris Johnson is facing challenging times. Those are the words of the EU Commission's President-elect Ursula von der Leyen.
He's vowed to have the UK out of the EU by the 31st of October, as we've just been discussing, but with an EU that looks unwilling to alter the existing deal and a Parliament that won't pass a no deal, just how will the new Prime Minister navigate his first few months in office? Jim Reid reports.
Our new Prime Minister was elected on a simple promise.
I think it's very, very important that we get ready to leave on October the 31st, come what may.
That date, October 31st, might feel like an age away, but in parliamentary terms, there's not much time left to try and solve our Brexit problem. Today, Theresa May will host her final Prime Minister's questions before the short drive to Buckingham Palace to hand over power. That leaves just one day for MPs to sit in the Commons before breaking up for their summer holidays. The next key date comes at the start of September. Parliament will resume for a short session before the party conference season. It's here that one of two paths to Brexit may become clear. One, can Boris Johnson and his new cabinet renegotiate an exit deal with Brussels, one that solves the problem of the Irish border? Any new Brexit deal would have to be signed off by the EU and need approval by Parliament. Path 2. If a new deal can't be done, will Boris Johnson accelerate plans for a no-deal Brexit? If that's the case, a battle with pro-EU MPs is a certainty, with Labour threatening a vote of no confidence and a possible general election. Parliament is likely to break around mid-September for those party conferences. Boris Johnson's speech at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester could well be crucial. But that leaves just a month of parliamentary time until we're supposed to leave. Watch for an EU summit, currently planned for mid-October, where there is perhaps the last chance for some sort of deal. If that doesn't happen, then we're left with two options: a no-deal exit, meaning we trade with other countries on stripped-down WTO terms, or yet another delay that some think could also lead to another referendum or a general election.
So obviously the key question is what happens next with Brexit? Can there really be a guarantee that we will leave the EU on the 31st of October? With me to discuss the issues around this, the Tory MP, the Brexiteer Mark Francois. Also joining us is Pete Wishart for the SNP and Stephen Kinnock, the Labour MP. Welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us. I'll come to you first of all, Stephen Kinnock, because yesterday Jeremy Corbyn said he'd surprise us with when he would put forward a motion of no confidence. When would you like to see one? Would you like to see one?
I think probably early September is the best point, because we'll know by then whether Boris Johnson has managed to get anything from Brussels or whether he's just intent on crashing our country out of the EU on a catastrophic no-deal basis. There is no mandate for that in Parliament. Both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party stood on a platform of the 2017 general election that there is no mandate for no deal, and that is very clear grounds then for a motion of no confidence in early September, I think.
Pete Wishart for the SNP.
Well, you know, as soon as possible, is my view. I mean, this is a man who has been elected in the backs of a curious 160,000 electorate of the Conservative Party. You know, never has one so unprepared and incapable of running a country been elected in the back of so few. So what we want is just to ensure that there is an opportunity for the people of this country to have their verdict on Boris Johnson.
The SNP could put forward a motion of no confidence. You don't have to wait for Labour.
Yeah, we don't, but I think to have any sort of credible chance, it would have to be Labour that would actually present that. And, you know, I mean, we're looking at them today and the rest of this week to see if that's going to be forthcoming. But the mechanics of this are really important. I mean, I think the most important thing is that we succeed if there's going to be a vote of no confidence. So I think we wait to see what happens this week, to see exactly the type of plans and ambitions he's going to put forward to the country, and then we'll make an assessment about that.
Mark Francois, the movements are in place, obviously behind the scenes and overtly, to block Boris Johnson ultimately delivering a no-deal Brexit. Can you be confident we will leave on the 31st of October?
I'm absolutely confident we will, because with respect to my colleagues, the British public are absolutely sick and tired of Westminster MPs playing silly games in order to try and prevent us leaving the European Union, which is what 17.4 million people voted for. They've absolutely had enough of it, and you saw that reflected in the European elections. Boris gets that, he completely understands it. That's why he's determined to lead us out, and in that he has a mandate from 17.4 million Brits.
He voted for as Prime Minister by 0.13% of the country. Previously, when he was a journalist, he wrote a column about Gordon Brown having no mandate to be Prime Minister after Tony Blair, and saying that it was cowardly not to have a general election. Should he have a general election and get a real mandate?
Well, I suspect at some point we're going to have a general election before 2022, but I think the absolute priority now for the country is to leave the European Union on Halloween. We had a general election in 2015, we had a referendum in 2016, which we still haven't honoured. We had another general election in 2017. I haven't got my constituents telling me, for God's sake, we need a general election, but they are telling me, for God's sake, get us out of the EU.
It's not answering the question, though, about his mandate.
Well, as I say, I believe he's been overwhelmingly elected by the members of the Tory party, and I believe he will win a vote of confidence in the House of Commons whenever they have the bottle to do it. But he has a mandate from 17.4 million people to leave the European Union. That's what he's going to do.
And ultimately, Stephen Kinnock, that is the position we're in. The country voted to leave. If you do anything to thwart that, that's thwarting democracy, isn't it?
Absolutely not. Before the referendum took place in 2016, absolutely nobody was talking about leaving the European Union without a deal. Indeed, in March 2016, Nigel Farage was saying we should leave on the basis of a Norway-style deal. Then in 2017, both the Conservative Party and the Labour Party stood on a manifesto which clearly said that Labour ruled out no deal explicitly. The Tories said they have to leave on the basis of an orderly and smooth Brexit. So no deal is a catastrophe for security, for the Northern Ireland peace process, for the steel industry, for the manufacturing sector, for pharmaceuticals. It is the most reckless and anti-national interest thing that we can possibly do. I'm in favour of leaving the European Union. I think that I stood on a manifesto in 2017 which said we should leave on the basis of a deal, but we have to leave on the basis of a deal which protects the British economy, protects security and protects the Northern Ireland peace process. And the idea that somebody who's been voted in by less than 100,000 Tory party members has a mandate for something which has never been on any ballot paper and in any manifesto is a constitutional outrage.
What would the SNP be prepared to do to try to stop no deal?
I will do anything possible. I mean, I was one of the first people to put forward an amendment on revocation just to stop this whole madness and just to say to the nation, look, they tried it, they've spectacularly failed, and let's make sure we just stop this business. I mean, I'm reflecting the views of...
You say it's madness. Sorry, people that voted to leave might find that really offensive. You're doubting what they believe, what they want.
Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to represent my nation, and my nation voted overwhelmingly to remain within the European Union, and I insist that that voice is listened to now. This has been totally disrespected all the way through this process. There is not one constituency in Scotland that voted to leave, and the thought of actually leaving without a deal, the disaster that would ensue following that, I think is totally unacceptable. And I was listening to Mark all the way through this campaign. Take back control. Remember that. That's the place that should have taken back control, and all they're trying to do now is suspend democracy in order to get the no deal through. It is totally unacceptable. If this is going to be about anything, it's about MPs deciding on behalf of their constituents, and I will represent mine and I will represent my nation and ensure that this madness is stopped.
Mark Francois, on the record, Boris Johnson has said conflicting things about his position on the EU, and his position, and we were hearing there from Stephen Kinnock, was not in the run-up to the referendum that it would be about leaving with no deal. Might he end up actually not being the Prime Minister that you think might decide that actually the best thing for the country is not to leave with no deal?
No, I'm absolutely confident we will leave. To be clear, no deal is not the desired end state. The desired end state is a comprehensive free trade agreement so that we can trade with our EU partners to our mutual economic advantage with low or perhaps even no tariffs at all. That's where we want to land this, and we want to begin those negotiations now. Well, we do, but if we haven't managed to do that by the 31st of October, which would be ambitious, then we're prepared to leave on WTO terms on the 31st of October to honour the promise and then get the free trade deal as soon as we can. So in summary, no deal is still better than a bad deal, but a free trade deal is better than both.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you. We've got much more analysis here from Westminster throughout the morning. I'm here till 11 o'clock with lots more guests joining me. For now, I will hand you to Simon King for a weather update. It's gorgeous here and boiling hot.
Yeah, hot and humid, Joanna. That's what we had yesterday as well. And of course, all that heat and the humidity created some really big storms last night. You may have been kept awake from either the heat or these storms as they move their way northward and eastward. Now, up to this morning, we've had around about 50,000 lightning strikes across the UK as those storms move their way further north and east. And that comes after what yesterday was the warmest July day for Jersey. 36 degrees Celsius recorded there. That's a new record. More records will be broken over the next few days. More heat in the forecast. Now, this morning, still some showers across Scotland. Those thundery in the far north, they will clear away. There'll be a legacy of cloud across Scotland, Northern Ireland, a few showers here. Elsewhere, though, there'll be lots of sunshine developing and temperatures not quite as high as yesterday. A little bit fresher, particularly in the north and the west, but still up to 32 Celsius down into the southeast of England. Through tonight, those showers will continue for a time across Scotland and Northern Ireland. Lots of clear skies, though, tonight into tomorrow morning. Not quite as sticky as last night. Temperatures down to about 13 to 16 degrees Celsius. But it's into Thursday that we're expecting some very high temperatures, incredible temperatures really. We've got a southerly wind, low to the west, high to the east. That draws in that hot air that's been just building across France, the Low Countries. It's going to spread its way into the UK, particularly across eastern areas. Lots of sunshine throughout Thursday, just the potential for a few showers developing across western areas. Those could well be thundery, but temperatures will be higher tomorrow. Up into the high 20s for northern areas, widely for England and Wales into the 30s, but it's in the southeast of England, around the London area, that we're expecting 39 degrees Celsius. That is significant because not only is it going to smash the UK July record, it could well surpass the all-time record of 38.5 degrees Celsius, which was set back in 2003. Now, going into Friday, this cold front in the west is moving eastward. That will introduce something a little bit fresher. So if the heat really isn't your thing, Friday, we're going to see those temperatures 21 to 23 degrees. Still quite warm in the London area, 27 Celsius, but obviously significantly fresher compared to Thursday. And into the weekend, it will be cooler for all of us. And there will be some heavy rain in the forecast, particularly towards northern and eastern parts of the UK. But some pretty incredible temperatures on the way for Thursday. Stay tuned to the forecast.
Welcome back. It's 10 o'clock on the day that Boris Johnson, the former Foreign Secretary, the former Mayor of London, is to be confirmed as the country's new Prime Minister. This is the scene live in Downing Street right now. Theresa May is expected to leave in the next few minutes to head to Parliament, where she will face MPs in her final Prime Minister's questions at midday. Then she will go to see the Queen in the early afternoon. A few minutes later, Boris Johnson will make that same trip to Buckingham Palace and is expected to start naming his cabinet in the late afternoon. Speaking to this programme, the Children's Minister Nadhim Zahawi told us he believes Boris Johnson can build a cabinet that will deliver Brexit by the 31st of October, even if that means a no deal.
I have had no conversation with my friend Boris, but he will have to decide who is his team. But I will guarantee you right now that they will start work immediately. He said it yesterday, the work begins now. His whole team will be starting work through the whole summer to make sure we're ready to leave on the 31st of October, which I am optimistic will be with a deal.
The SNP say they want a no-confidence motion in the new Prime Minister to be tabled as soon as possible to prevent a no-deal Brexit.
This is a man who has been elected in the backs of a curious 160,000 electorate of the Conservative Party. You know, never has one so unprepared and incapable of running a country been elected in the back of so few. So what we want is just to ensure that there is an opportunity for the people of this country to have their verdict on Boris Johnson.
The SNP. Key to whether Boris Johnson succeeds or fails will be the team he picks, and we should start getting the details throughout the afternoon. Right now, let's catch up on all the latest developments with Lucreza in the studio.
Joanna, thank you very much. Very good morning. Boris Johnson will take over from Theresa May as Prime Minister today after winning the Conservative leadership race yesterday. The new Tory leader will enter Downing Street later this afternoon following an audience with the Queen at Buckingham Palace. He's expected to announce some senior cabinet posts. His allies say he'll form a cabinet for modern Britain, with more women and ministers from ethnic minorities. Well, my colleague Anita McVeigh is in Downing Street, and all eyes on that door behind you, Anita.
Absolutely, Luqueza, keeping a close eye on all the comings and goings here today. The choreography, if you like, of the handover of power after this long goodbye from Theresa May, who tried and tried again to get her withdrawal deal through Parliament, but didn't manage it. Boris Johnson says he is the person to change that. Much of the tone in these early days of him being Prime Minister will be set by who he appoints, the people he puts around him, not just in Cabinet, but other appointments too. And one of the most eye-catching appointments that we're hearing about, or expected appointments that we're hearing about so far today, is the Director of Vote Leave, Dominic Cummings, as a senior advisor to the incoming Prime Minister. Now, this is going to delight many Brexiteers, but for those MPs who want to stop Brexit, or those who are determined that the UK should only leave with a deal, well, that's probably going to put them on an even higher state of alert than they are already. It suggests that Boris Johnson is really going all in with that campaign promise to deliver Brexit, but with the deadline, that October 31st deadline, less than 100 days away, it certainly suggests that we are in for a very fraught few months in politics.
Anita, thank you. Well, Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage says he's open to an electoral pact with Boris Johnson, but only if he's serious about his commitment to the October 31st deadline for leaving the EU. Boris Johnson has ruled out a deal with Mr Farage and stressed he does not want an early election. But Mr Farage said an election would be required to ensure that Brexit can be delivered on time, and if his party and the Tories agreed an alliance, they could smash the Labour Party. The operator of a British flagged oil tanker has made contact with the 23 crew members for the first time since the ship was captured by Iran in the Strait of Hormuz last week. A spokesman for the Swedish-based tanking operator, Stena Bulk, said the crew was safe with good cooperation with the Iranian personnel on board. The detainment of the Stena Impero comes amid tensions between the UK and Iran, just weeks after Britain helped seize a tanker carrying Iranian oil off Gibraltar. Now, police are searching for 3 people who've gone missing in the River Thames. The Metropolitan Police said a swimmer went missing at Shadwell Basin on Tuesday evening, a second at Waterloo Bridge, and a third near Kingston High Street. Well, the Met Office has recorded temperatures in excess of 30 degrees Celsius in England, and it's expected to be even warmer today. Previous highs could be surpassed in the UK before the end of the week. Overnight, there were thunderstorms in some areas. Elsewhere, parts of Europe have already seen record-breaking temperatures. Now, immediate improvements are being ordered at a young offenders institution in West London. The move comes after a report found that there'd been a collapse in standards of care and safety at Feltham. The site holds more than 100 boys aged between 15 and 18. A Twitter account purportedly from a Championship footballer who intended to come out as gay has been deleted. The account, which began this month, was followed by almost 50,000 people. Its first tweet claimed that the account holder was a professional footballer who had come out to his family and would reveal his identity soon. But a day before the supposed announcement, the account tweeted that "I thought I was stronger, I was wrong," before it was deleted. That's some of the other news stories taking place today. Back to Joanna now.
Thank you, Luqueza. Well, we're expecting to hear news of key cabinet appointments later today. Those said to be in the frame include the Home Secretary Sajid Javid, the former Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab, and Liz Truss, Philip Hammond's current deputy at the Treasury. Priti Patel could return to the cabinet less than 2 years after resigning as International Development Secretary over a row over unauthorised meetings with Israeli officials. And the Sports Minister Tracy Crouch, who quit last year in a dispute with the Treasury over fixed odds betting terminals, could also be in line for a recall. Among those tipped for promotion are the Housing Minister Alok Sharma and Local Government Minister Rishi Sunak. And one of those who may be expecting a job is the Housing Minister James Brokenshire. He backed Boris Johnson from the get-go and is with us now. Welcome, thank you.
Good morning.
So have you had conversations about your future job?
No, I think that today is one of those days where the focus is on Prime Minister's questions, and then obviously Boris Johnson being formally our Prime Minister. That will take place later. There will no doubt be lots of speculation, as we've seen in the newspapers, but that's the process, and therefore Prime Minister now forming a new government, which I'm sure will be broadly based, that we are seeking to unify our party, our country, delivering Brexit by the 31st of October and getting on with all of those domestic priorities.
The language coming out is that he wants it to be broadly based and unifying, and the announcement yesterday of Mark Spencer as Chief Whip, who is a Remainer, sent out a signal. But we've at the same time got Remainer ministers who are leaving en masse, who are forming quite a strong alliance on the backbenches, we presume, because they just do not agree with Boris Johnson's policy. So how can he have a broad church with that reality?
I think when you look at all of the people involved here, they want a deal. They want to see a deal with the European Union and leaving on the 31st of October with that deal. That, I think, does unify the party. That unifies the country and what people voted for. And so I think when people actually look at what Boris Johnson has been saying, that sense of going to Europe, being able to secure an agreement, getting this done by the 31st of October, actually, with that focus, with that intent, that does bring people together. And the strong sense I've got is a sense of people wanting to give Boris that chance, that opportunity, that ability to go on and do what we need to do for the country.
He said Brexit by the 31st of October, do or die, and there are people within your party and elsewhere who say absolutely no way is that something I'm going to endorse, and I will do everything I possibly can to stop that happening.
Well, what I think people have been saying is that they don't want to see a no deal, but we clearly have to, I think, ensure that we are prepared, that we're ready to do that, that we can do that to get the best possible deal with our European partners. And he sort of said that's shrinkingly small that would be the case.
So are you saying then he's effectively in the same position as Theresa May, which was that she kept saying, yes, we have to let them believe that we want no deal, but ultimately it didn't happen. So no. Is that what's going to happen? Is it more of the let's make them believe it?
Boris has been very clear that we are leaving the European Union on the 31st of October, in his words, come hell or high water, in that sense that we have to provide that certainty, because it has been this instability, this position that we've been in for so many, many months, and sadly that we've not been able to secure that agreement to leave. But we need to be ready for that. I think that is what Boris brings, with that new energy, and see that optimism, being positive about what the future may bring, but equally knowing that we must leave so that we can get on with those domestic priorities, making that happen, but wanting to do that with a deal, but being prepared if that isn't possible.
Lithuania's EU Commissioner wrote yesterday, a functioning democracy demands discussion. Using whatever means to win political battles just does not fit the bill. Boris Johnson is the example of this in action. Cheap promises, simplified visions, blatantly evident incorrect statements on EU-imposed food safety standards. That's the business about the kippers. I can't think of a better golden standard, he says, than the USSR in terms of fact distortion and reality falsification.
Well,
that's our new Prime Minister he's talking about.
I think people need to see Boris Johnson as our Prime Minister, give him that opportunity where he has, I think, shown very clearly over the last number of weeks that he wants to reach out, he wants to get that agreement, which is in the interests of the EU, is interests of the UK. And therefore, yes, going in, setting out that we do need to leave. We need to leave by the 31st of October. But equally wanting to do that with that spirit of partnership, that spirit of how we can achieve that together, and approaching those discussions with European leaders, European partners, with that firm intent.
So then if that is really his intent, is he going to have members of his cabinet who are not signed up to a no-deal Brexit?
Well, Boris Johnson said as Prime Minister he would want people to be clear that we are leaving on the 31st of October with or without a deal. And I think it is that certainty that we have to bring to this.
We want to be inclusive, but as long as you agree with us, isn't it?
Well, no, I think it's rather that we want to see that we are leaving on that date. And that, I suppose, is the pointed issue here, is that sadly we have been in this period for many, many months where we've not been able to achieve that. The instability, the insecurity, the, I think, lack of attention that we've been able to bring because of the bandwidth that Brexit sucks into everything. That's where we need to make this happen so that we can get on with the domestic priorities, on the police, on education, on trade and how we can play our part around the globe and indeed on our NHS too. That's what allows us to deliver on this, which is why I think Boris is absolutely right in saying that we've got to get that stability and that certainty, and that means leaving on the 31st of October.
What about Nigel Farage's suggestion that the way to guarantee leaving on the 31st of October is to have a general election, do an electoral pact with the Brexit Party, and you can sew it up?
Well, I think you'd expect someone like Nigel Farage to say that for his interest in the Brexit Party. No, we are.
But if you believe the national interest is to get a Brexit by the 31st of October, and Parliament, as it's currently figured, may well not deliver that, then there's a solution, if you think that's right for the country.
I think that we have been very, very clear on the ability to get a deal that commands support in Brussels and also here in Parliament. I think that can be done. That's where the focus needs to be. And suggesting that you just have another election with everything else that's going on, well, I think that may suit Nigel Farage and the Brexit Party. It does not suit this country. It's about acting in the national interest, and that is what I'm confident Boris Johnson will do in securing that deal.
When Gordon Brown came in without winning a general election, you may be familiar with this, Boris Johnson wrote at the time, "It's a gigantic fraud. It's the arrogance, the contempt. That's what gets me." He said that in 2005 there was a large number who voted Labour on the strength of a dwindling but still significant respect for the Prime Minister. They voted Tony, now they get Gordon. On his own logic, exactly the same applies now, and he should call an election.
No, we've had a constitutional settlement for so many, many years that the Prime Minister can change without a general election, whether that be, you can look at so many precedents in the past. I think the last thing we need at the moment is a general election. We need to provide that sense of leadership, which I believe Boris Johnson will provide, that sense of optimism, that positive spirit as to where our country can be in the future. That's where we need to be focused, getting the deal to ensure we leave on the 31st of October, but being ready to leave on that date so that we can get on and make this happen.
Is that an example of him saying one thing and then doing another? And there are other examples of it around leaving the EU, when he was writing various things indicating that it wasn't right to leave with no deal, and now he believes it is. I mean, do you trust that he will actually stick to this course, or that come 31st of October there'll be a very logical, plausible reason for why we're not going to do it?
I thought of carefully in terms of the decision I took, but I believe very strongly that Boris is the right person to lead our country, to get that agreement with the EU, to see that we leave and deliver on a bold, ambitious, positive domestic agenda. That's why I think he is the right person at this time to lead our country through the challenges that do lie ahead. And I have every confidence that he can unify my party, unify the country, deliver on Brexit and get on with a bold and ambitious plan for our country so that we can be positive, we can be ambitious for the future.
This place shuts down after tomorrow. That's a pretty anticlimactic start to a new government, isn't it?
No, I think, we obviously have summer that is ahead of us, but I am very confident that Boris will use that time ahead over the summer to provide those links, forge those connections with European partners, to get on with the work of securing that agreement, but equally charting out, I think, what will be a very ambitious plan for our country, looking at our infrastructure, where the jobs are, where we keep our skills moving forward, investing into the police, ensuring that our schools are well supported. I think that is what you will see in the days ahead, as well as strengthening our proud United Kingdom too with our union. So actually it will be a very, very busy few weeks ahead, and therefore no, I think this is the start and how he will now move on.
Right at the start you said that you've not had conversations about your future job. Do you hope to remain in government?
Well, I really enjoyed the 15 months of having returned to government after having serious illness, and therefore to be able to have served in the way that I have. Look, I be delighted to serve, but ultimately that is a decision for the Prime Minister. My focus is on supporting the government, seeing that we deliver on Brexit, and carrying on with that policy agenda for our country and serving my constituents in whatever way I can.
James Brokenshire, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. Well, Brexit has claimed the careers of the last two Conservative Prime Ministers, and with Theresa May, for all her talk about wanting to address the UK's social problems when she took the job, trying to navigate our way out of the EU in the end swallowed up everything else. So will Boris Johnson manage to be different? In a moment, we'll ask what he might want to achieve beyond Brexit and how he might go about it. First, let's take a look at what else is waiting in his in-tray when he moves into number 10.
There is one massive sheet of blank paper in Boris Johnson's in-tray. The success of his whole premiership may well be judged on whether we stay or go by the end of October. But there are other problems in the country that need sorting out. Like social care. A green paper on how we pay for nursing in our old age has been repeatedly delayed. There's now talk of a new state-backed insurance scheme to encourage people to save for better care from their 40s. There is education and possible new rules to end the funding gap between schools in different parts of the country. Overall spending per pupil in England has fallen 8% since 2010. Then there is housing, policing and the economy. Some think we're seeing the early signs of a slowdown or even a possible recession. Boris Johnson has pledged tax cuts for higher earners, but it's hard to see that policy easily getting through Parliament. Longer term, he'll have to make controversial decisions on a new runway for Heathrow, on the future of the HS2 rail link, and of course there's always the possibility of an early general election, though the polls at the moment suggest neither the Conservatives or Labour can feel confident about winning any sort of majority.
Well, we can now speak to Harriet Baldwin, a Foreign Office Minister who backed Jeremy Hunt for leader, Culver Ranger, an advisor to Boris Johnson while he was Mayor of London, and Justine Greening, former Cabinet Minister and Conservative MP for Putney. Welcome all of you. Thanks for coming. Well, I'll start with you, Culver, because you were an advisor to Boris Johnson when he was London Mayor, and of course he has said again and again that what he did as London Mayor is shows why he should be Prime Minister. It's been said that when you sit down with the reality of being Prime Minister, it is a head spinner, it is a shock.
It is, and it was likewise as well when Boris walked into City Hall. You know, in fact, the untold challenge there is that Boris walked in to an institution that had been built by the previous mayor and had never changed political hue. So a real political challenge to get the machinery mechanisms of London to work with a Conservative mayor. But there were plenty of other challenges. He faced a financial crisis. The London boroughs had funding issues. TfL had a black hole. There was even then, in 2008, an issue with knife crime. All of these things immediately were in Boris's in-tray, and as a team, we all had to learn and get a grip pretty fast to what we had to do to get things right, which I think then followed.
Justine Greening, does the main thing in the in-tray, Brexit, with that tight deadline of the 31st of October, drown everything else out, or is there going to be space for anything else?
I think it depends. If Boris can break the Brexit logjam, then it gives a much wider space for Britain to debate all the other things that all of us care about. For me, it's social mobility, but also housing, environment, everything. But if he can't, and if we come back after summer recess, he's not got a substantially different deal and Parliament remains gridlocked, then we'll end up with the same situation we've had over the past 12 months, which is disastrous. In other words, Britain going nowhere and Parliament stuck on Brexit and the British people feeling like the rest of their lives are going on, but Parliament's not rising to the challenge.
When you say if he resolves it, then we move on, and you're obviously talking about trying to do a deal over the summer. What about resolving it the other way, no deal Brexit on the 31st of October? Does life then just continue and other issues start to come?
I think, make no mistake, going ahead with Brexit is a long-term, probably minimum decade-long project that will require a huge amount of government. I'm talking about the fact that Parliament has little space to debate anything else whilst we try and find a route through Brexit. And what Boris Johnson needs to do, I think, tomorrow is actually come to Parliament, engage with MPs and start to really show the kind of leadership that I think we need in order to break the Brexit logjam. What he shouldn't do is make the mistake that unfortunately Theresa May made, which was to ignore the parliamentary maths. Boris needs to now confront that and find the compromise, if you like, that can get through. And for me, there is a compromise that can work. It's bringing back a deal, but then saying not only will Parliament have the chance to vote on it, the British people will. And I think if he's prepared and willing and able to do that, then actually I think we can have a decision on Brexit, and that's what Britain desperately needs.
Harriet Baldwin, I mean, this is supposed to be a conversation about matters away from Brexit, but I mean, inevitably, it's just, everything else just kind of, it feels like hot air at the moment. As long as there is this to grapple with, what do you think he should do?
Well, I certainly think that it's going to be the main media story, of course it is, but under the surface, I think Theresa May did a lot of work on record funding for the NHS, increased funding for schools, the climate change action that she's taking, the UK hosting the next COP, all of the work that we're doing in terms of defence and foreign affairs. So that should continue.
On her way out, started at making lots of announcements, obviously, to try to define some sort of a legacy. But Boris Johnson's going to be coming in and not looking backwards on his career, looking forwards. And what's there in the centre is Brexit.
And the media focus will rightly be on that, and the new Prime Minister's focus will rightly be on that, because there's this 100 days to the deadline. But I think in the leadership campaign, which I think the Conservatives and Brandon Lewis deserve credit for running a fantastic leadership campaign, lots of excellent ideas, lots of really strong candidates, focused in terms of policing. Kulveer mentioned knife crime, and I'm sure Justine, as a London MP, it's absolutely crucial that we follow through in terms of that investment in police, because I do think that the British public are asking, particularly here in London, for more action on that. So I think those will be the sorts of things that can also happen with the team that he puts around him.
Yeah, and as Harriet is saying there, Kulveer, he's got lots of ideas that he's spoken about on the campaign trail, the extra police, increasing the starting point for national insurance contributions, more money for education, free TV licences for over 75s, raising the level at which stamp duty is levied, broadband, you've already spoken about that. That's lots of money. And is he good at his sums? I mean, it sounds like a magic money tree. That was all said during the campaign, but the reality, where's the money going to come from?
It is lots of money, but he's done this before. We were faced with huge budgets and budget challenges in London when we came in 2008, and people said you can't deliver the services and not raise, say, the precept at City Hall. We didn't raise the precept. We found the efficiencies. We continued to deliver the services. And in fact, we improved the services.
Efficiencies for this level of spending, though?
And this is what Boris does. He will set out a vision, which is what he's been doing. Yes, Brexit, the malaise of Brexit, the 3 years of frustration, we have to get past that. But he's setting out that agenda post-Brexit of security, safety, investment, jobs, technology, and that's his vision. And now what he will do is get the right people, a strong team around him who buy into that vision to deliver it, because that's what he's saying. He's got to unify not just the Conservative Party, which is what his first objective is, as well as Brexit, but also the country behind a positive agenda. Backing Boris has been about backing Britain, and I think we haven't heard enough of that for a while, and I think people out there want to hear that.
Oh, I mean, he's been saying it's all about optimism for some time, hasn't he? But Justine Greening, would you serve under him?
I've said that I'd love to serve my country, but I think both Boris and I recognise that I and my community have a very different view on Brexit, and I believe in cabinet collective responsibility. So for me, serving my local community and my country comes ahead of having a job or a career in his government, and I'll continue to serve my community from the backbenches.
Okay, so would you be in potentially a cross-party group of MPs who are willing to do anything to stop a no-deal Brexit?
I think many Conservative MPs are deeply concerned about the prospect of a no-deal Brexit. It's the most profoundly unconservative policy that I've ever come across. It leads to higher unemployment, it hurts the NHS, it will mean less money for public spending.
So
it's
you
a disaster.
fundamentally think it's wrong. So would
not
you
actually a Conservative policy.
Would you vote against him then in a no-confidence vote?
Well, I don't think Britain needs a general election, and it would certainly be bonkers for Boris to decide to pursue a general election route instead of a popular vote in the form of a referendum.
You want a referendum,
to
but we've been around that, and it doesn't look like that's going to be delivered.
I think it will do, though.
So if the only way to stop a no-deal Brexit is to vote against Boris Johnson in a vote of no confidence, would you do it?
I don't think it'll come to that, because I find it
inconceivable. But would you do it if it did come to it?
But I genuinely don't think it will come to that, because I find it inconceivable, A, that Parliament won't find a way to stop no-deal Brexit. We have a parliamentary democracy. We take the decisions as MPs. And B, I find it inconceivable that a Boris Johnson government or any government could willfully override the wishes of elected members of Parliament representing their communities. That is a real profound constitutional challenge for Britain. So it would go far wider than an issue of no deal if we reach that point, and that's why I don't expect us to reach it.
Do you believe that Brexit can be stopped by whatever mechanisms Justine Greening is talking about, or anyone else, whether it's tabling legislation? I mean, ultimately there could be, whether it's supported by an MP like Justine Greening or others, a vote of no confidence, the government could come down. Will something happen to stop Brexit?
Well, I certainly won't do it. I think it's very important that we deliver it for the British people. It was something we committed to doing. And for me, my red line is completely different from Justine's, which is I could never vote for a second referendum. I think we've asked the British people once in one referendum, and we need to respect the result of that and deliver the outcome. And so, I have a different angle on this than Justine does.
An anonymous texter: I'm delighted to finally see a man who can get the job done in place. This is a great day for our nation. Darren on Twitter: more of the hope for the best, but nothing but arrogant disdain when they're asked what happens if they're wrong. No one has faith in politicians. So let's hear the marvellous plan. A huge welcome to Boris Johnson, says another anonymous texter. Now we want the Brexit we voted for, then we can close down all of the hateful rhetoric and shenanigans of those who were determined to deny us. Thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you. Thank you for your comments at home. Do keep them coming in. Well, Boris Johnson has long been a favourite of Tory party members, drawing huge crowds for his speeches at the party's annual conferences. But in years gone by, it was another blonde Conservative who, it was said, knew how to reach the parts, the grassroots others could not. That's Michael Heseltine, and I'm going to be speaking to him in just a few moments. First of all, though, let's join Anne Widdecombe. She joins us on the line. She is, of course, a very high-profile former Conservative MP and government minister, and currently a Brexit MEP. Welcome, Anne Widdecombe. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Yes, good morning.
Good morning. The leader of the Brexit party, Nigel Farage, has suggested there should be an electoral pact with your former party, the Conservatives, have a general election, get together and deliver a no-deal Brexit. I presume you think that's a good idea too?
Well, what Nigel Farage is saying is that if it comes to a general election, then obviously, if what is wanted is Brexit, then those who want Brexit should consider cooperation. But I might also point out that an awful lot of Labour voters want Brexit and look to the Brexit party to deliver that. And as we're the party at the moment that is commanding huge support from the popular vote, I think that obviously what we're saying should be taken into consideration. But at the moment, forget general elections, what we want at the moment is Brexit. And we've been promised by this new incoming Prime Minister that we're going to get that on October the 31st. Well, I'm not convinced, but I'm prepared to wait and see.
Would you return to the Conservative Party? I mean, it sounds like now there's not a difference between what you want and what's being offered with your former party.
Oh, I think the tremendous difference is being prepared to leave without a deal if we have to, and actually focusing on getting Brexit. Our party's been talking about Brexit. I mean, never mind Boris Johnson. It's been talking about Brexit for the last 3 years, and it's been miserably failing to deliver. And the same thing is true of the Labour Party. Goodness knows what their stand is on Brexit. It changes from one day to the next. What Nigel Farage is offering is a very clear vision. We want to be free of the EU, free of their laws, free to make our own trade deals, free of their border controls. That is what we want. That is the vision. Now, if Boris can get that on October the 31st, we will cheer. But as I say, 3 years and it hasn't been achieved.
The IMF said a no-deal Brexit ranks alongside US trade policy as one of the chief threats to the world economy. Do you have qualms about the impact, job losses, impact on economic growth, potentially talk of a recession in this country next year in the event of there being a no-deal Brexit?
Before. We've all heard it all before. We heard that was what was going to happen if we so much as voted to leave the EU. That's what we were told was going to happen. We were told unemployment was going to rise. It's fallen. We were told there would have to be an immediate emergency budget with more austerity. Austerity has actually been relaxed. We were told taxes were going to have to go up. We were told the world was going to come virtually to an end, and it didn't happen. And the very same people who were holding out all that gloomy prognosis then are the same people who are now saying, well, we can't leave without a deal. Nobody is saying it's an ideal situation, but it will not be the disaster that desperate Remainers are trying to portray.
Anne Widdecombe, thank you very much. Well, with me now is the former Deputy Leader of the Conservatives, Michael Heseltine. Lord Heseltine, after the EU referendum results, Lord Heseltine said Boris Johnson had torn the Conservative Party apart. Welcome. So you presumably no longer think, or I don't know if you ever thought, but he was certainly seen by many as the Heineken politician, the Tory who could reach the parts other politicians couldn't reach. How do you see him?
Well, I think that is one of the enigmas of Boris, because he undoubtedly has a quality to extend a reach beyond the Conservative Party. And that explains his remarkable achievement in winning 2 mayoral elections in London. London's not a Tory constituency, and Boris won it twice. And that was where the reputation came from. There is no doubt that in the referendum campaign he had a very similar sort of effect of probably influencing the result. But all of this is part of the makeup of Boris. There are problems on the other side. And if you looked at today the Conservative Party in the polls, there are frightening indications as just how much support the party's lost. Can he build it up? I'd be very surprised if he can, as long as the divisions on Brexit are tearing it apart.
You didn't, I think, vote for either Boris Johnson or Jeremy Hunt in the leadership
vote for
campaign.
anybody who threatens to make this country poorer or less powerful.
I mean, you know, some will look at what has just happened with this election campaign. 0.13% of the country have voted for the new Prime Minister. There was a very limited group of people who had the privilege of being able to vote for the new Prime Minister, and the turnout was 87%. I mean, you might think that everybody, it's a self-selecting group of people with an interest in politics, everybody would have taken the chance to exercise their vote. You didn't. What do you think is going on here?
Well, you're quite right, but nor did 18,000 others. And I think that is a very interesting question. Who are they? Why didn't they? And is it because they will not vote for a Conservative leader who threatens a Brexit? That is my guess. I don't know your experience, and you're not in a position to express it even if you wish to. But wherever I go, I meet Conservatives who say we could never vote for a Brexit Conservative leader. And the public opinion polls are beginning to reflect that. The European election results reflected it. So I think there are real problems, particularly in the idea of an early election, because I don't myself see that producing any overall majority in the foreseeable future.
What do you think will happen? I mean, you know, we're in this position where we've got a Prime Minister who said Brexit do or die by the 31st of October, at the same time as saying no deal Brexit, chances of that are 1,000,000 to 1. Do you think we will end up leaving?
I think the odds are still in favour, but they're by no means certain anymore. I think there's a high chance we won't leave. I think there's 2 ways in which that could be determined. One is the second referendum, which today is possible might lead to a reversal of Article 50. The second is a general election, which I think would simply perpetuate for the foreseeable future the instability in that place over the road, where there is no majority and there is no prospect. As I can see it in the evidence of the electoral pollings, there is no prospect of a majority.
Politics can feel like a confusing place when you have MPs who've said that they believe one thing and then they completely change what they believe, apparently. Remainers have switched to becoming leavers, becoming no-deal Brexiteers. What's your view of that?
Well, I'm afraid you are seeing human nature at its most fragile in this debate. What are the ultimate loyalties? Well, I believe they are to your country. Some think they are to your party. Others take a rather narrower view about their own careers. And you can only observe and make judgments about that. But I think that was Theresa May's fundamental undoing, having campaigned to remain. She then told us that we've got to leave. And I think Jeremy Hunt suffered from the same problem. I would almost certainly have voted for Jeremy Hunt if he hadn't abandoned what he patently believes to be in the national interest.
We should ping off the guy ropes of self-doubt and negativity. Boris Johnson talks optimistically. I mean, are we too negative? Do we not believe enough in ourselves?
Well, you see, I have many hats. One of them is as a businessman. And when I read things like that, I say, now what does that mean for my business? Which is what all other businessmen think. And as it's just waffle, just hot air, it doesn't give me any indication at all about what I should do about investment. And if you look at British industry today, it has stopped investing. There is a cloud of uncertainty which will not go away until we resolve the Brexit issue. If you were a foreign investor trying to decide where to invest in the European market, would you come to Britain today without knowing whether they're in or out of the European market? Of course you wouldn't. If you go to the city today, they're moving jobs one after the other, 10, 100 more, into the European single market, because the City of London is the European single market headquarters, not London's. And that we are now consistently undermining. So it's no use saying we're going to throw off the shackles. The shackles are those of Brexit. We were the fastest growing European market until Brexit.
Is it right and fitting that the person now in charge, though, is somebody who was one of the key figures in Brexit? We've heard again and again, well, if we were in charge, it would have been different. Now Boris Johnson, who was an architect of getting us out, is in charge, and we see what happens.
They always try that trick, don't they? Now, who did Theresa May put in charge? She put three of the most vehement Brexiteers in charge. Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson. Brexit Minister, David Davis. International trade, to get all those easy trade deals, Liam Fox. So they were in charge for something like 18 months, was it? And what did they achieve? Well, you only have to ask the question to know there's no answer, because they didn't achieve anything.
Would you like to see Remainers serving in his cabinet?
Well, I think that Boris Johnson would be wise to balance his budgets, his cabinet. That is the traditional way in which Tory leaders have sought to unite the party. So I strongly believe that he should represent all strands of opinion. But his problem, of course, is that later today, significant numbers of cabinet ministers are likely to resign, so I read in the press. So talking about uniting the party as his chancellor and a team of his ministers walk out to the back benches just is waffle.
And you say, so you read in the press, I mean, how plugged in are you? Are you having conversations with people like Philip Hammond?
No, I'm not having conversations with Philip Hammond. I've met him in the course of business, but I've certainly not had any conversations on this subject with him. But I have a respect for the journalists. They tend to know what's going on, and the last few days has been one list after another of cabinet ministers who, in a matter of hours from now, are going to resign.
I mean, we talk about the Conservative Party having been torn apart, the conflict over Europe. 4 years. The referendum was supposed to end that, but now we potentially are going to see quite a powerful group of former Remainer ministers gathering on the backbenches in a camp of opposition to the Conservative Prime Minister.
I hope so, yes. I think that's what's going to happen.
And what do you hope will happen?
Well, I hope that they will act in the national interest to stop Brexit.
Vote against the government in a vote of no confidence?
Well, you have to make up your mind about the priorities, and without the slightest doubt, the overarching priority is for Britain to remain at the heart of Europe, at its heart of its economy, at its strategic activities, at its social agenda, its peace-loving agenda, its democratic agenda. We have to be there. All throughout history, we've always been there, usually conducting wars one way or another.
So
now
what you're talking about potentially is an incredibly short-lived premiership, less than 3 months.
It could be. I'm not forecasting it, but it is. Anything is possible. And the hardest question for anybody, for you, for me, on any of these programs, when people say, well, what's going to happen? Because none of us know. And frankly, what has happened over the last few months, you couldn't have made it up.
Have made it up. Not even in the cricket. Everything is unpredictable and can change at the last moment. Lord Heseltine, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's just take a look at what's happening in Downing Street. Theresa May is expected to leave number 10 any minute now, and she will make her way here just a very short distance away as she goes for her last Prime Minister's questions. So she will leave the steps of Downing Street on this incredibly hot, sunny day, and obviously she will be walking away from power, and Boris Johnson, the incoming leader, will be moving in, and after Prime Minister's questions later is expected to start revealing details of who his new cabinet will be. Loads of you getting in touch with your thoughts on politics right now. One anonymous texter: I'm delighted to finally see a man who can get the job done. This is a great day for our nation. I'm just going to find some more of your comments that I haven't read before. Reese on email: how a man who was sacked twice, showed superhuman incompetence as Foreign Secretary and was mediocre at best as London Mayor is the new Prime Minister is beyond me. He will either be a revelation or a complete shambles. Wendy on email: I'm chuffed to bits. He'll give the EU the kick up the pants it needs and get us away from the dictatorship and put our country first, because May had no intention of getting us out. She told us what we wanted to hear. Andrew on email: people said Churchill would be a disaster and he was one of the best PMs we had. Martin on email: I hope the new Prime Minister will not forget the very large number of Conservatives that will fight and fight again for the European project. We will not go away. Kevin on email: if anyone could remind me a time that solely optimism sorted out a complex situation, the EU have closed the gates on any negotiations. We have zero leverage and we have nothing to bluff. I feel for the civil servants across Whitehall trying to make all the plans to keep the country above board amongst all the nonsense spouted from MPs of all sides and their bluffing, blustering and incoherent arguments. 100 days for nothing to change, no chance of any negotiations, and the awful no deal to come. We'll keep an eye on Downing Street and we'll go there as soon as Theresa May leaves. Well, Boris Johnson has been a journalist, a TV personality and a politician in public life for the last 20 years. But how well do we know him?
As far as I can work out, are pretty incompetent and then have a veneer of competence.
Yes.
You do seem to do it the other way round.
Yes. Oh, you can't rule out the possibility that, you know, beneath the elaborately constructed veneer of a, you know, blithering idiot, there lurks a blithering idiot.
Well, we're going to speak now to two people who do know him well. Toby Young went to Oxford University with him. Alistair Burt was a minister at the Foreign Office when Boris Johnson was Foreign Secretary. Welcome, both of you. Well, Toby Young, lots of stories of when he was at university. How well did you know him? What do you remember of it?
I didn't know him that well, but we were exact contemporaries. So we both went up in 1983, and I was involved in the union where Boris eventually became president. I wasn't quite a Boris stooge in the Oxford Union, but I was sort of one removed from being a stooge, I'd say.
Is that, you say Boris stooge? But you were kids, you were students.
He was clearly very ambitious even then. I think he told his younger sister when they were even younger that he wanted to be world king, and then he told someone at Eton, where he went to school, that he wanted to be President of the United States, which isn't out of the question because he was born in New York. So actually wanting to be Prime Minister was a scaling down of his ambitions. I mean, he is extraordinarily ambitious, but so were lots of people at Oxford. But unlike many of them, it didn't seem like a particularly unrealistic ambition, because he clearly had such ability and such extraordinary force of personality. His outsized ambition matched his outsized personality.
Let sunshine win the day is the message. I mean, how do you see it? Is it an optimistic day?
I'm incredibly optimistic. I was involved in the Leave campaign. I think that leaving the European Union creates huge opportunities for this country, and I'm really positive about Britain's post-Brexit future. And the fact is, the person who has been Prime Minister for the past 3 years hasn't shared that optimism. I think for all her rhetoric, she's regarded Brexit as a disaster that has to be managed. I don't think that's not Boris's attitude. He believes in Brexit, he campaigned for Brexit. I think he should have been our Prime Minister 3 years ago, and I hope he can take up on the optimism and ebullience that he injected into that campaign so successfully 3 years ago.
Alistair Burt, that little clip that we just played of Boris Johnson talking to Jeremy Clarkson when he said you can't discount the possibility that behind the veneer of a blethering idiot there lies a blethering idiot. What do you think about that? I mean, there is so much said about Boris Johnson and, you know, where the truth lies in the public and the private persona and what he really believes.
Well, first and foremost, I don't think in any way he is a blethering idiot. I mean, the Boris Johnson persona is, I think, pretty carefully constructed. Boris is very skillful. He knows what appeals to people, and he's been able to build that into something that has attracted sufficient support for him to be Prime Minister. That is an extraordinary skill. And there's plenty of people who have boyhood ambitions and they never get fulfilled. He has. So there's a lot there. The job for him now, though, is to be something he's never been before. I think until you walk through the doors of number 10 Downing Street, you don't know what sort of Prime Minister you're going to be. And he now has to demonstrate that behind that persona that's got him where it has, winning an election is one thing, governing is quite different. He will have every opportunity to govern well, he will have all the advice that he needs, he's got to take the wise advice and discount the foolish advice, but he's got a big job to do. But can he do it? Yes, I think he can.
There are examples that are repeatedly cited of how he apparently doesn't have a grip on the detail. I mean, you worked with him in the Foreign Office. One of the examples from that period was about Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, who's being held in Iran, and his off-the-cuff comments about what she may have been doing in Iran that was subsequently obviously completely denied. It wasn't true, but it is said to have had an impact on what happened with her. It had a material impact on a live and difficult situation. What do you think about this issue around whether he has a mastery of the detail or not?
I think we've got to be very blunt. There's been things he hasn't done as well as he should have done. And I think in foreign affairs in particular, you've got to know the stuff. Yes, you can give general direction, but you do have to understand the detail. I recall a situation where I was sitting with David Cameron, where he had to make a decision on whether or not a hostage could be rescued. And it meant that you had to take that decision. You could listen to advice, but the advice is often coming from different directions. You can or you can't. So the person in charge has got to be able to have sufficient grasp of the detail to be able to do that job.
And to be nimble. I mean, when sort of looking back, he apparently wrote 3 different articles about where he would end up sitting on Brexit
yeah.
With different outcomes, because that was how he was going to evaluate it. Can he make these quick decisions?
I think my point is, I prefer Jeremy Hunt. I voted for Jeremy, and people can think about that as they wish. I made a choice and then. It doesn't now matter. Boris Johnson has won. He's got all the equipment to do the job, we know that. My hesitation was I wasn't sure in his roles in the past he demonstrated that he had used that equipment to maximum effect. Now he's got to. In a way, it doesn't really matter. We can all look back, but in 2 weeks, in a month, in 3 months, we'll know whether he's got what it takes for the job. And all this will be interesting background, but it won't be as relevant as what he's going to do. But to me and to many others, he's got to demonstrate some things that we haven't previously seen, but we all know under the bonnet is there.
So in 2 to 3 months, we'll know if he's delivered. Alistair is saying, could he potentially be the shortest-lived Prime Minister if he doesn't deliver in 3 months? You know, there is a hard deadline there.
Well, I looked this up actually, and the shortest-serving British Prime Minister is George Canning, who served for 119 days. I'd be surprised.
Well, he's got 100, hasn't he, Boris Johnson, until the 31st of October?
Slightly more, but yeah. I think it's slightly unfair of Alistair, I think he is being very judicious, to say that Boris has never demonstrated his skills in an important leadership position before. Well, you know, you said we haven't seen it before.
There have been flaws.
I think you know, that's overlooking his pretty successful tenure as Mayor of London for 8 years, where he halved the murder rate, he reduced traffic fatalities, he introduced an ambitious house building scheme, a very successful rent-a-bike scheme, oversaw the barnstorming 2012 London Olympics. And I think the reason...
They're achievements which obviously he's very proud of, but that wasn't him lined up against 27 countries saying, we've done the deal and that's it, we're not budging. And those countries having a strong incentive not to budge, which is that in the future, if they do, other people negotiating with them will think, well, we stand firm enough, they'll bend.
Well, the reason Michel Barnier has not budged on the backstop to date is because they don't want to be seen to be siding with a country that's leaving the EU, the UK, over a country that's remaining, Ireland, and it's Varadkar who's been the blockage when it comes to doing anything about the backstop. Varadkar, I think, is showing signs of more flexibility. The Deputy Prime Minister of Ireland wrote a piece in the Sunday Times this Sunday, making some conciliatory noises. I think it's dawned on Varadkar that no deal will be as damaging, if not more damaging, for the Irish economy as it would be for the UK economy. And they don't want to be seen to be causing that by his intransigence on the backstop. So I think there is room for some further negotiation and some flexibility.
Toby Young, Alistair Burt, thank you very much. Going to bring you some more comments coming in from you while we look at number 10, because we are expecting Theresa May to leave there any moment. Terry on text, welcome new Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Now deliver Brexit for us and do use the no deal as our ace. Cardiff. Mrs May was a Ramona and never mentioned our ace card in negotiations, as she did not want the UK to leave the treacherous, corrupt EU. And then on Twitter, Boris Johnson was not a good mayor of London. He wasted tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, on vanity projects and bad decisions. He cannot be trusted with the country's bank book. Jackie on Facebook, well, it's certainly going to be different to anything we've had in decades, so our reserve judgment. We need something different, that's for sure, because what happened in recent years hasn't worked. It's make or break. You never know, we can live in hope. London liked him, so he might surprise us. An anonymous texter, Justine Greening, talks about a potential constitutional crisis for Britain. She's ignoring the fact that this has already occurred, as MPs have willfully ignored the will of the people. The people employ MPs, not the other way around. Joe on text, a general election is what the country needs so the people can say who they want to be Prime Minister. When they knew Theresa May was going, should not be up to the Tory MPs to decide. The sooner a general election, the better. Well, we are joined now here by three journalists. Matthew Paris, who has predicted Boris Johnson's premiership would fall apart in a year. The columnist for The Times, he said Boris Johnson is a lazy good-for-nothing. We're also joined by Telegraph writer Sharanjit Jacobs, who says he will either deliver Brexit by Halloween or he will be gone by Christmas. And the broadcaster, journalist and prominent Brexit supporter, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Welcome, all of you. Matthew Paris, well, they lazy, untrustworthy, do nothing. That's our Prime Minister you're talking about.
Yes, and I was being kind. And did I say within a year? I think he'll be gone before a year.
When do you think he'd be gone?
Well, probably shortly after October the 31st, when presumably we've either crashed out without a deal, which will be disastrous, or his enemies will have called a vote of no confidence, which we will have lost, or he's called an election.
So you still think we could leave without a deal by the 31st of October?
Well, yes, we can leave without a deal now. We can do that any time we like, and I don't think he's going to get a deal. So the conclusions are inescapable.
Sharanjit Jacobs, you're not giving him much time either. He'll either deliver by the 31st of October or he'll be gone by Christmas.
Well, that's the simple arithmetic of it. Either we have Brexit by October 31st or we have a complete collapse in the Tory heartlands of support for the Tory party. That in turn will trigger moral compunction, but also pragmatism on the parts of MPs defecting to the Brexit party because they'll be scared of losing their seats, frankly. We've only got a government with a working majority of about 2 or 3 seats now, so yes, we're looking at a general election. I think it's far better for Boris to call a general election now, frankly, roll the dice before Brexit betrayal post-October 31st.
Julia Hartley-Brewer?
I have to say, I think that going to a general election before delivering Brexit, the third Prime Minister from the Conservative Party not to deliver Brexit in 3 years would be a big gamble. I mean, I'm also a little bit wary, but for different reasons, about a Boris Johnson premiership. I've never drunk the Boris Johnson Kool-Aid. I think, the victory in London in 2008, 2012 was long before he became a sort of divisive character after running the Vote Leave campaign. But I do think, I mean, some of the appointments we're already hearing about in number 10 are very encouraging. Dominic Cummings, who's of course the brain behind the Vote Leave campaign, and others who are coming on board for this new government. It's looking very hopeful that there's going to be the thinking process behind delivering a proper Brexit. And I think for a lot of Brexiteers like me, that is more encouraging even than just having Boris Johnson as PM.
Matthew Parris obviously thinks that he can deliver a no-deal Brexit, but isn't the reality of the political situation that actually there is no guarantee, and
there's no
MPs
guarantee.
Will find
there
a way
is no guarantee, but the default legal position is that we have a Brexit, a no-deal Brexit that defaults on October the 31st. The Prime Minister currently, Theresa May, could have done that on March the 29th and chose not to. This is now about the will rather than the way. If there is a will, there is automatically a way to do it.
Likewise, Matthew Parris, I mean, isn't there a way for the MPs who say they will block a no-deal?
Yes, there is, and that would be one's hesitation in predicting that he will deliver no deal. I'm not sure about this taking control of the parliamentary timetable and all that stuff. I think the only thing...
I mean, they've done it before.
Yes, but there isn't much time left to do it, and it isn't clear what its consequences would be. The only way now is a vote of no confidence. And if it appears that we're heading for the cliff, I think he might lose a vote of no confidence in the House of Commons. That's what he has to fear most.
Well, I think that it would be a strategic error for him to try and form a sort of unity-style cabinet this afternoon. I think that it's a myth that you try and neutralise the Remainers through unity. They are irreconcilable. You try and neutralise the Remainers by calling their bluff.
Could he form a unity-style cabinet, though, anyway?
I think he will attempt
to. They're walking away, aren't they?
I think he will attempt to bring in some Remainers into his cabinet. That is my suspicion.
But some Remainers, but they're going to have to sign up to
yes,
Brexit
the Amber
on the
Rudd of this world, etc.
And what about Jeremy Hunt? How important a figure is he? He's holding out, we understand. He said he's either going to stay as Foreign Secretary, be Home Secretary, Chancellor,
yeah,
or
he's not going to be Chancellor.
So he's not walking away necessarily.
You can't have another Remainer Chancellor. And fundamentally, he is a Remainer at heart. So that's why he got a third of the votes, not two-thirds in the election in the Tory party membership. I think that most people would agree he's probably been an awful lot better as Foreign Secretary than Boris Johnson ever was. It might be good to keep him in that role. I think, though, we have got to a time where, certainly up to October the 31st, we need to have Brexiteers in the key position. And certainly people who are absolutely committed, do or die, as Boris Johnson said to Talk Radio a few weeks ago, do or die, it's Brexit on the 31st of October. Jeremy Hunt's not actually convinced by that.
I would think that Jeremy Hunt is undecided in his own mind whether he really wants to carry on in a Boris Johnson government, but that if he was asked to be Foreign Secretary, he would feel out of a sense of duty that he should.
But he would he would have to sign up to this pledge to leave with no deal.
Well, he has said that he could envisage leaving with no deal. I don't think his heart would be in it, and that's why I think Foreign Secretary, he'd feel he had a sense of duty to carry on. Anything else, I think he'd probably feel well out of it for a little while.
We're just seeing a car arriving at number 10 to take Theresa May to the House of Commons for her final Prime Minister's questions. What are your thoughts, all of you? I mean, do you feel sympathy for Theresa May on this day?
No, I think that we've had 3 wasted years. I think that she made some serious errors, calling a general election and squandering her majority, failing to prepare for no deal, destroying our one bargaining chip to get a better deal from the EU. So I think we just need to look to the future now.
Absolutely, I don't feel an inch of sympathy for Theresa May at all. I mean, she basically lied to the Tory MPs when she got elected by them, and she lied to the public. She said no deal was better than a bad deal. She changed her mind on that, or lied to us all along. She got a bad deal, couldn't get it through Parliament, and she still tried to push for it, and she wasn't prepared to go for no deal. So I have to say goodbye and good riddance.
I've been rude enough about her in the past, and I think now is not the time to be rude again. She did her best.
We're out of time here. Thank you all so much. The drama continues. I'll hand you back to Anita in the studio. Bye-bye from me.
This is BBC News. I'm Anita McVeigh, live from Downing Street on the day that Boris Johnson becomes the UK's Prime Minister.
Has it sunk in yet?
Getting there.
Last night he celebrated victory in the Conservative leadership contest with party members. Today he'll enter the doors of number 10 to lead the country. Mr Johnson will meet the Queen at Buckingham Palace to get formal permission to form a government. Before that, Theresa May will also be at the palace to offer her resignation to Her Majesty shortly after her final Prime Minister's questions. And we're expecting to see her leave for the Commons shortly. The attention will then move to the cabinet reshuffle. Supporters say Mr Johnson will form a team for modern Britain.
We all have to put our shoulder to the wheel, support our leader, our Prime Minister, and absolutely give him the support that's required to deliver Brexit.
Elsewhere on Mr Johnson's team, he's expected to appoint the campaign director of Vote Leave, Dominic Cummings, as a senior advisor. It's a day of comings and goings here in Downing Street. Follow every development with us here on the BBC News Channel.
And I'm Laquessa Burak. Also this morning, after yesterday's heat, heavy rain and thunderstorms hit parts of the UK on what was a warm and uncomfortable night for many. And those warm conditions are set to continue today, with temperatures forecast to reach 38 degrees.
Good morning and welcome to Downing Street, where Theresa May is emerging to leave number 10 for her final Prime Minister's questions. And within a short time after that, she will then head to Buckingham Palace to formally tender her resignation as Prime Minister to the Queen. And in the choreography that follows, Boris Johnson will then move to the palace, go to the palace, where he will request permission from the Queen to form a government